When a desperate single mother falls asleep on a stranger's shoulder during a red-eye flight, she wakes up to find him calling her baby ours, and discovers he's not just any man, but a mafia boss who's already decided she belongs to him. Tonight, I'm taking you into Nia's world, where protection comes with a price, and some debts can only be paid with your heart. Stay with me until the end to see how far love and desperation can take a woman, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The fluorescent lights of Terminal C buzzed overhead, like dying insects as Nia Sullivan clutched her boarding pass with trembling fingers. Flight 847 to Chicago, the last flight out, the only one she could afford. Her 3-month-old son Mason stirred restlessly in her arms, his tiny fist curled against her chest, where her heart hammered against her ribs. Final boarding call for Flight 847 to Chicago O'Hare. The gate agent's voice crackled through the speakers, each word feeling like a countdown to disaster. Nia's phone buzzed. Another text from her aunt. "Your mother is asking for you. Please hurry." The words blurred as tears stung her eyes. 3 months. That's how long it had been since she'd spoken to her mother. Since the night she'd packed her bags and left with nothing but her pride and a baby on the way. 3 months since her mother had called her foolish, reckless, a disappointment. And now, "Ma'am." The flight attendant's voice was gentle but firm. "We need to board you now if you're taking this flight." Nia nodded, shifting Mason to her hip as she fumbled for her ID. The baby bag slipped from her shoulder contents, scattering across the gate area floor. Diapers formula, the last $20 she had to her name. All of it exposed like her desperation for everyone to see. "Shit," she whispered, dropping to her knees to gather everything. "Allow me." The voice was low-controlled with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. Strong hands, hands with expensive rings, began collecting her scattered belongings with methodical precision. Nia looked up to find herself staring into the darkest eyes she'd ever seen set in a face that belonged in a Renaissance painting. Sharp cheekbones, a jawline that could cut glass, and an expression of contained power that made her breath catch. "Thank you," she managed, accepting her things from this stranger who moved like he owned the world. "I'm sorry, it's been a long day." He straightened to his full height, easily 6'3", and Nia felt dwarfed by more than just his physical presence. Everything about him screamed money and influence, from his perfectly tailored black suit to the way other passengers unconsciously stepped aside as he moved. "No need to apologize," he said, his gaze shifting to Mason with an intensity that made Nia's protective instincts flare. "Beautiful child." "We need to board," the flight attendant interrupted, checking her watch with barely concealed irritation. The man, this stranger who'd helped her, produced his boarding pass with fluid grace. "First class," Nia noticed. "Of course." She clutched her economy ticket and followed the line onto the plane, acutely aware that he was somewhere behind her. The aircraft was fuller than she'd expected for a red-eye flight. Nia made her way down the narrow aisle, Mason growing heavier in her arms with each step. Her seat was in the back, 34B middle seat, sandwiched between a businessman who reeked of gin and a college kid with headphones cranked so loud she could hear every beat. She settled in, trying to ignore the way the businessman's eyes lingered on her low-cut sweater, the only clean shirt she'd had left. Mason was getting fussy, his little face scrunching up in preparation for one of his legendary screaming fits. "Please don't," she whispered, bouncing him gently. "Not here. Not now." But Mason was beyond reasoning. His cries echoed through the cabin, drawing annoyed looks and muttered complaints. The businessman beside her made an exaggerated show of putting in earplugs while shooting her dirty looks. "Some people shouldn't travel with babies," he said loud enough for half the plane to hear. Nia's cheeks burned with humiliation. She fumbled for a bottle for anything that might calm Mason, but he only cried harder. 20 minutes into the flight, and she was already that passenger, the one everyone hated. "Excuse me." That voice again, rich, commanding. Nia looked up to find the stranger from the gate standing in the aisle, ignoring the flight attendant who was trying to direct him back to first class. "Sir, you need to return to your seat," the attendant insisted. "We're preparing for takeoff." "There's been a mistake with the seating arrangements," he said smoothly, producing something from his wallet. A black card that made the attendant's eyes widen. "This young lady and her son should be in first class." "Sir, I can't just—" "I believe you can." His tone didn't change, but something in it made the attendant step back. "Check your manifest. I think you'll find there's been an upgrade." The attendant scurried away, returning moments later with a nervous smile. "Mrs. Sullivan, if you'd please follow me. We have your first-class seats ready." Nia stared at the man, her mind reeling. I can't afford." "Consider it a courtesy," he said, extending a hand to help her up. "For the baby's comfort." She wanted to refuse. Everything about this screamed danger, screamed too good to be true. But Mason was still crying. The businessman was still glaring, and the offer of space and peace was too tempting to resist. "Thank you," she whispered, that letting him guide her toward the front of the plane. First class was a different world. Spacious seats that reclined into beds, soft lighting, and blessed quiet. The man, she still didn't know his name, settled into the seat beside hers, as if it had been his all along. "I'm Luca," he said once they were airborne, accepting a glass of wine from the flight attendant, who practically glowed in his presence. "Luca Castellano." "Nia Sullivan." She adjusted Mason in her arms, marveling at how much calmer he seemed in the quieter environment. "And this is Mason." "Mason," Luca repeated as if testing the name. A strong name. There was something in the way he said it that made Nia's skin prickle with awareness. She studied his profile as he gazed out the window. The strong nose, the full lips, the way shadows played across his features in the dim cabin lighting. Everything about him was designed to draw attention, to command respect. "What do you do?" she asked, immediately regretting the question. It was too personal, too forward for someone who'd known him for all of an hour. His smile was enigmatic. "I solve problems." Before she could ask what that meant, exhaustion hit her like a freight train. The adrenaline that had carried her through packing the flight to catch her connection, the stress of Mason's crying, all of it crashed down on her at once. Her eyelids grew heavy despite her best efforts to stay alert. "Sleep," Luca said softly. "I'll watch over you both." She should have protested. Should have insisted she was fine, that she didn't need help from a stranger, no matter how kind he seemed. But Mason had finally settled his little body warm and relaxed against her chest, and the leather seat was more comfortable than her own bed had ever been. Her last conscious thought was of how safe she felt, surrounded by luxury she could never afford, protected by a man she didn't know but somehow trusted. She drifted off with her head tilted toward the window, Mason cradled between them, like a bridge connecting two strangers across the darkness. Nia awoke to the soft murmur of voices and the sensation of warmth against her shoulder. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. The gentle hum of engines, the smell of expensive leather, the feeling of being cocooned in comfort. Then awareness crept in slowly, like sunrise breaking through clouds. She wasn't alone. Her head was resting against something solid and warm, something that rose and fell with steady breathing. Her eyes snapped open to find herself pressed against Luca's shoulder, his expensive suit jacket soft beneath her cheek. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was that Mason wasn't in her arms. Panic shot through her like electricity. She jerked upright, her heart hammering as she looked around frantically. "Mason, where's—" "Shh." Luca's voice was calm, soothing. "He's right here." And she turned to find Mason cradled in Luca's arms like he belonged there, like this was the most natural thing in the world. The baby was awake, staring up at this stranger, with the kind of trust that babies reserved for family. Luca held him with practiced ease, one large hand supporting Mason's head, while the other rested protectively over his small body. "I hope you don't mind," Luca said. His voice pitched low to avoid disturbing other passengers. He was getting restless. "I didn't want him to wake you." Nia blinked, trying to process the scene before her. How did you—" "I have experience with children," he said, simply adjusting his hold on Mason with fluid grace. "He's very well behaved." The flight attendant appeared beside them with a warm smile. "How are we doing here? Can I get anything for you and your family, Mr. Castellano?" "Your family." The words hung in the air like a question that hadn't been asked. Nia opened her mouth to correct the assumption, but Luca spoke first. "We're fine, thank you. Perhaps some warm milk for our son." "Our son." The words hit Nia like a physical blow. She stared at Luca, waiting for him to correct himself, to acknowledge the mistake. But he continued speaking to the flight attendant, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if Mason truly was his child, as if the three of them were a unit that made perfect sense. "Right away, sir," the attendant said, beaming at the picture they must have made. The handsome man in the expensive suit, the young mother still beautiful, despite her exhaustion, the perfect baby completing their perfect little family. When they were alone again, Nia found her voice. "Why did you say that?" "Say what?" Luca's attention was focused on Mason, who had wrapped his tiny fist around one of Luca's fingers with the fierce grip that only babies possessed. "Our son. You called him our son." Luca's dark eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not embarrassment or confusion, but a kind of quiet certainty that was somehow more unsettling than any explanation could have been. "Did I?" he said mildly. "How interesting." "Interesting." Nia's voice rose slightly, drawing looks from other passengers. She lowered it again, leaning closer to him. "It's not interesting. It's wrong. He's not our anything. I don't even know you. Don't you?" The question was asked so quietly, she almost missed it. But there was something in his tone that made her examine his face more carefully, searching for what recognition? Some memory she'd forgotten, but there was nothing. She would have remembered a man like Luca Castellano. No woman could forget him. The flight attendant returned with a bottle of warm milk, and Luca accepted it with a nod of thanks. Then, to Nia's amazement, he began feeding Mason with the kind of natural competence that came from practice. Mason took the bottle eagerly, his eyes never leaving Luca's face. "You're good at that," Nia said, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. "Children respond to confidence," Luca replied, his attention still focused on Mason. "They can sense when someone means them harm and when someone will protect them." "And which are you?" He looked at her, then really looked at her, and Nia felt exposed under that dark gaze, like he could see past her exhaustion and desperation to something deeper, something she hadn't even acknowledged to herself. "What do you think?" he asked. Before she could answer, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Chicago O'Hare. Please return to your seats and prepare for landing." The spell was broken. Reality crashed back in. Her mother dying in a hospital bed, her empty bank account, the uncertain future waiting for her on the ground. Nia reached for Mason, and Luca transferred him to her arms without resistance. But she noticed the way his fingers lingered brushing against hers in the exchange. "Thank you," she said, settling Mason against her shoulder. "For everything. The upgrade, the help with Mason. I don't know how to repay you." "No repayment necessary," Luca said, straightening his tie with practiced movements. "It was my pleasure." The plane touched down with barely a bump, and soon they were taxiing toward the gate. Around them, passengers began gathering their belongings, preparing for the familiar chaos of disembarkation. But Nia remained seated, suddenly reluctant to end this strange interlude. "I should get my things," she said, not moving. "Your bags will be taken care of," Luca said, standing to retrieve a carry-on from the overhead bin, along with everything else. "What do you mean, everything else?" But he was already moving toward the front of the plane, leaving her to follow, with questions burning on her tongue. The first-class passengers disembarked first, and Nia found herself walking beside Luca through the jet bridge, Mason quiet in her arms, as if he too sensed the strangeness of the situation. The terminal was chaos. Late-night travelers stumbling toward baggage claim announcement, echoing off the walls, the fluorescent lighting harsh after the dim cabin of the plane. Nia stopped walking, suddenly overwhelmed by it all. "I need to find my bag," she said, "and then figure out how to get to the hospital. My mother is at Northwestern Memorial," Luca finished. "Room 412. Nia stared at him. "How do you know that?" "The same way I knew you needed an upgrade." He gestured toward the exit where two men in dark suits stood waiting. They had the same controlled stillness as Luca, the same sense of barely contained power. "Your transportation is waiting." "My transportation?" Nia's voice cracked. "I didn't arrange any transportation. I can't afford—" "You don't need to afford anything," Luca said, his hand settling on the small of her back to guide her forward. "Not anymore." The two men approached as they walked, flanking them without a word. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, with scars that spoke of violence, took Nia's diaper bag from her shoulder before she could protest. The other spoke in rapid Italian to Luca, his voice too low for her to catch more than a few words. But she didn't need to understand the language to recognize the tone. It was a report. These men worked for Luca, and they were telling him something important. "Wait," Nia said, stopping in the middle of the terminal. People flowed around them like water around a stone, but the three men created a pocket of stillness that felt separate from the chaos. "I don't understand what's happening here. Who are you, really?" Luca studied her face for a long moment, and Nia had the unsettling feeling that he was weighing her somehow, deciding how much truth she could handle. "I'm someone who takes care of problems," he said finally. "And you, Nia Sullivan, have several problems that need solving. Such as your mother's medical bills, for one. The experimental treatment her doctors want to try, but insurance won't cover. The rent on your apartment that's 3 months overdue. The credit cards that are maxed out, the student loans in default." He paused, letting each revelation sink in. "The fact that you have $17.38 in your checking account and no way to get home after this trip." Nia's blood turned to ice. "How do you know all of that?" "Because I needed to know," Luca said simply, "before I decided to help you. You had me investigated." The words came out as a whisper, but they might as well have been a scream. "While I was sleeping on the plane, you had someone—" "I had you investigated before the plane," Luca corrected, his voice still maddeningly calm. "The moment you sat down beside me in the boarding area." The terminal seemed to spin around her. Nia clutched Mason tighter, her mind racing to make sense of what she was hearing. "That's impossible. We only just met." Did we? That question again. That same quiet certainty that suggested he knew something she didn't. Nia searched his face desperately, looking for any sign that this was some kind of elaborate joke. But there was nothing except that steady, dark gaze that seemed to see straight through her. "I think I would remember meeting you," she said weakly. "Memory can be unreliable," Luca replied, "especially when someone is under stress, when they're scared, desperate, running from something they can't escape." "I'm not running from anything. Aren't you?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and distinctly masculine. "You left Denver in the middle of the night, with nothing but a suitcase and a baby. You've been living under a different name for 3 months. And now you're here hoping to reconcile with a mother who cut you off when you needed her most." Each word was like a physical blow. Nia felt herself shrinking under the weight of his knowledge, the casual way he laid out the wreckage of her life like items on a grocery list. "How?" she whispered. "How could you possibly know all of that?" "Because I know you," Luca said softly. "Better than you know yourself, I think." One of his men cleared his throat, a subtle reminder that they were standing in the middle of a public terminal, having a conversation that was drawing attention. Luca nodded once, a barely perceptible gesture that somehow communicated volumes. "We should go," he said to Nia. "Your mother is waiting." "I can't." The words tumbled out of her, born of desperation and fear. "I can't get in a car with you. I don't know who you are or what you want or why you're doing this. This is insane." "What's insane," Luca said, "is standing here debating when every minute we waste is a minute less you'll have with your mother." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Nia's resolve crumbled, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. Her mother was dying. She had no money, no resources, no way to get to the hospital, except to accept help from this mysterious stranger who seemed to know everything about her life. "If you hurt us," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "if you do anything to my son, I would die before I let harm come to either of you," Luca said, and there was something in his voice that made her believe him. "You have my word. The word of a stranger. The word of a man who's already proven he's willing to take care of you." He gestured around them, encompassing the first-class upgrade, the warm milk, the careful way he'd held Mason while she slept. "What more proof do you need?" Nia looked down at her son, who was staring up at her with those wide, trusting eyes that saw only love in the world. What choice did she have? She could try to make it to the hospital alone, spend money she didn't have on a taxi, arrive broke and panicked. Or she could trust this man who had shown her nothing but kindness, even if that kindness came wrapped in mystery. "Okay," she whispered, "but I want answers. Real answers. Not riddles and half-truths." "You'll have them," Luca promised. "All of them. But not here." He guided her toward the exit, his hand warm and steady against her back. The two men flanked them again, moving with the kind of choreographed precision that spoke of long practice. They passed through the terminal like they owned it, other travelers unconsciously stepping aside to let them pass. Outside, Chicago's November air hit like a slap. Nia shivered, clutching Mason closer as they approached a line of black SUVs idling at the curb. The vehicles were identical. Tinted windows, expensive models, the kind of cars that screamed money and power. One of Luca's men opened the rear door of the middle SUV, revealing an interior that was more luxurious than most people's living rooms. Leather seats, a small bar, enough space to stretch out comfortably. Nia hesitated at the threshold, every instinct screaming at her to run. "Trust me," Luca said softly, reading her hesitation. "For tonight, just trust me." She looked at him. Really looked at him. and saw something in his eyes that decided her. Not just the obvious attraction she'd been fighting since the moment they met, but something deeper. A recognition that she couldn't name but couldn't deny. She got in the car. The interior was warm and quiet, insulated from the chaos of the outside world. Luca settled beside her, maintaining a careful distance that somehow felt more intimate than if he'd sat closer. One of his men took the driver's seat while the other disappeared into a different vehicle. As they pulled away from the curb, Nia caught sight of her reflection in the tinted window. She looked like exactly what she was. A desperate woman in over her head, holding on to her child like he was the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. Maybe he was. "The hospital is 20 minutes away," Luca said, his voice cutting through her spiraling thoughts. "Your mother's condition is stable for now, but the doctors want to discuss treatment options with you as soon as possible." "You talked to her doctors?" Nia's voice came out sharper than she'd intended. "I talked to someone who talked to her doctors," Luca corrected. "Information has a way of finding its way to me. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're ready for right now." Nia wanted to argue to demand the full truth, but exhaustion was settling over her again like a heavy blanket. The luxury of the car, the warmth, the sense of being taken care of. It was seductive in a way that frightened her. She'd been fighting so hard for so long that the idea of letting someone else handle things, even temporarily, was almost irresistible. Mason had fallen asleep again, his small body relaxed and trusting in her arms. Seeing him so peaceful, so safe, made something inside her chest ease slightly. Whatever Luca's motives, whatever game he was playing, he'd been nothing but gentle with her son. That had to count for something. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly, her eyes still on Mason's sleeping face. "Because you need help," Luca replied. "And I'm in a position to provide it." "But why me? Why us? You could help anyone." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it before, almost vulnerable. "Have you ever seen something and known instantly and without question that it belonged to you?" The question caught her off guard. What do you mean, bro?" "A work of art, perhaps. A piece of music. Something that speaks to a part of you that you didn't even know existed." He turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the car, his eyes seemed to burn with an intensity that made her breath catch. Something that you would do anything to protect, to possess, to keep safe from a world that doesn't understand its value. Nia's heart hammered against her ribs. "Are you talking about Mason?" "I'm talking about both of you." The words hung between them like a challenge, like a promise, like a threat. Nia stared at him, trying to read the truth in his expression, but he was already turning away, looking out at the Chicago skyline as it rushed past their windows. "We're here," he said, as the SUV turned into the hospital's circular drive. Northwestern Memorial Hospital rose before them like a fortress of glass and steel, its windows blazing with light against the dark sky. Ambulances waited near the emergency entrance, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across the pavement. The whole scene felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than her real life. The car stopped, and immediately one of Luca's men was opening her door, offering a hand to help her out. Nia accepted it automatically, her mind still reeling from their conversation. Mason stirred in her arms as the cool air hit them, but didn't wake. "Room 412, Luca said, appearing beside her. "The elevators are just past the main desk." She started toward the entrance, then stopped and turned back to him. He was standing beside the SUV, hands in his pockets, looking like he owned the entire hospital, which for all she knew, he did. "Aren't you coming?" she asked. "Not yet," he replied. "This time is for you and your mother." but I'll be here when you need me." "How will you know when I need you?" His smile was enigmatic. "I'll know." Nia wanted to ask more questions, to demand explanations that made sense. But the hospital loomed before her, and somewhere inside her mother was waiting. She turned and walked toward the entrance, Mason warm and solid in her arms, aware with every step that Luca was watching her go. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and she stepped into the bright, antiseptic world of the hospital. Behind her, she heard the SUV's engine start up again, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't. If she looked back now, she might lose her nerve entirely. Instead, she walked to the information desk, gave her mother's name, and tried to prepare herself for whatever came next. But as she waited for the elevator, one thought kept echoing in her mind. Something that you would do anything to protect, to possess, to keep safe from a world that doesn't understand its value. The elevator doors opened, and Nia stepped inside, holding her son close and wondering what she'd gotten herself into. The only thing she knew for certain was that after tonight, nothing would ever be the same. As the elevator carried her toward the 4th floor, toward her mother, and whatever reconciliation or heartbreak waited there, she found herself thinking not of the past or the future, but of a pair of dark eyes that seemed to see straight through her soul, and the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she wanted them to. The elevator climbed with agonizing slowness, each floor marked by a soft chime that seemed to echo in Nia's chest. 4th floor. The doors slid open to reveal a long corridor lined with rooms, the familiar hospital smell of disinfectant and despair washing over her. Room 412 was at the far end, and with each step her heart hammered harder against her ribs. She paused outside the door, Mason's weight warm and reassuring in her arms. Through the small window, she could see a figure lying still beneath white sheets, machines beeping steadily in the background. Her mother looked so small, so fragile, nothing like the formidable woman who had raised Nia with an iron will and impossible standards. Taking a deep breath, Nia pushed open the door. "Mom." Elizabeth Sullivan's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on her daughter's face. For a moment, neither woman spoke. 3 months of silence, of pride and stubbornness hung between them, like a wall that neither knew how to breach. "Nia." Her mother's voice was barely a whisper, roughened by the ventilator that had been removed only hours before. "You came." "Of course I came." Nia moved closer to the bed, adjusting Mason in her arms. "How are you feeling?" Elizabeth's eyes shifted to the baby, and something in her expression softened. "Is that him? Is that my grandson?" "His name is Mason." Nia's voice caught slightly. "Mason James Sullivan." "James." Elizabeth smiled, the first genuine smile Nia had seen from her in years. "After your father." They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them. Finally, Elizabeth spoke again, her voice stronger now. "I was wrong, Nia. About everything. The things I said when you left, the way I treated you. I was scared and angry, and I took it out on you when you needed me most." Tears burned behind Nia's eyes. "Mom, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Elizabeth struggled to sit up straighter, and Nia quickly moved to help her, careful not to disturb Mason. "I do have to say it. The doctors, they're not sure how much time I have left, and I won't waste another minute being too proud to tell my daughter I love her." The tears came, then silent and overwhelming. Nia leaned forward, letting her mother's frail hand touch Mason's tiny fist. 3 generations connected in that moment, the circle of family closing, despite everything that had threatened to break it. "I love you too, Mom. I've missed you so much." They talked through the night, filling in the gaps that months of silence had created. Elizabeth told her about the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer stage 4 discovered too late for traditional treatment. Naya shared stories about Mason's birth, his first smile, the way he could sleep through anything, except the sound of her crying. "You're a good mother," Elizabeth said, as dawn began to creep through the hospital windows. "Better than I ever was." "Don't say that." "It's true. I was so focused on making you strong that I forgot to make you feel loved. But look at you now, raising a beautiful boy all on your own, fighting for your family. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. More proud than I've ever been." Mason had woken during their conversation, and Elizabeth had insisted on holding him despite her weakness. The baby seemed to sense the importance of the moment, staying calm and alert in his grandmother's arms. When he smiled up at her, Elizabeth laughed through her tears. "He looks just like you did at that age," she said. "Same eyes, same stubborn little chin." "Great," Nia said dryly. "Another Sullivan with an attitude problem." "The world needs more Sullivans with attitude problems." Elizabeth's voice was growing weaker now, the effort of staying awake taking its toll. "Promise me something, Nia. Anything. Promise me you'll fight for him. For both of you. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not enough, like you don't deserve everything good this world has to offer. You're a Sullivan, and we don't give up." "I promise." Elizabeth closed her eyes, still holding Mason, and for a terrifying moment Nia thought she'd lost her. But then her mother's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, and she realized Elizabeth had simply fallen asleep. A soft knock at the door interrupted her vigil. Dr. Martinez, her mother's oncologist, entered with a gentle smile and a tablet full of charts that Nia didn't want to understand. "How is she?" Nia asked quietly, carefully lifting Mason from her mother's arms. "Stable for now, but we need to discuss your mother's options. There's an experimental treatment available, immunotherapy combined with targeted radiation. It's expensive and not covered by insurance, but it could give her months, maybe even years." Naya's heart sank. "How expensive?" "The initial treatment course is $200,000. If it works, ongoing maintenance could be another $50,000 every 6 months. The numbers hit her like physical blows. $200,000. She had $17 in her checking account. She couldn't even afford the gas to drive home, let alone experimental cancer treatment. "I see," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. And without the treatment, Dr. Martinez's expression grew even more gentle. "Weeks, maybe a month or two with aggressive palliative care." Nia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Mason fussed in her arms, sensing her distress, and she bounced him automatically while her mind raced through impossible calculations. She could sell everything she owned and not come close to that kind of money. Could take out loans against her non-existent credit mortgage, a future she didn't have. "I need some time to think," she managed. "Of course. I'll have the financial counselor come speak with you about payment options. Sometimes we can work out arrangements." "Dr. Martinez," a new voice interrupted from the doorway. Smooth, cultured, with just a hint of an accent that made Nia's pulse quicken. Luca stepped into the room looking as perfectly composed as he had the night before. He'd changed clothes, now wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Nia's rent. But the aura of controlled power remained unchanged. "Mr. Castellano." Dr. Martinez's demeanor shifted subtly, becoming more deferential. "I wasn't expecting you." "Plans change." Luca's dark eyes found Nia's, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. "I trust Mrs. Sullivan's mother is receiving the best possible care." "Absolutely. We were just discussing treatment options." The experimental protocol, Luca said. It wasn't a question. You'll want to begin immediately. Sir, the financial arrangements have been taken care of. Luca produced a black card from his wallet, the same one that had worked magic on the airplane. Whatever Mrs. Sullivan needs. The best doctors, the best treatment, private rooms, round-the-clock nursing care. Money is no object. Nia stared at him, her mind struggling to process what was happening. I can't let you do that. You're not letting me do anything, Luca replied calmly. I'm choosing to do it. But why? This is hundreds of thousands of dollars. You don't even know me. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps I should give you some privacy to discuss this. That won't be necessary, Luca said. Please begin preparations for the treatment immediately. I'd like Mrs. Sullivan to have the first session within the week. The doctor nodded and practically fled from the room, leaving Nia alone with Luca and her sleeping mother. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and impossible implications. I don't understand, Nia said finally. Any of this. The plane, the car, now this. What do you want from me? I want you to let me take care of you. The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge. Nia searched his face for some hint of deception, some indication that this was all too good to be true. But there was only that steady, dark gaze that seemed to see straight through her defenses. Nobody takes care of someone for nothing, she said. Especially not someone they just met. I told you, we didn't just meet. Then when, where, because I promise you I would remember. 2 years ago, Luca interrupted. Denver, you were waitressing at a little Italian place called Marcello's. The words hit her like a physical blow. Marcello's. She remembered that job, remembered how desperately she'd needed the money, how she'd worked double shifts until her feet bled in her cheap shoes. But she'd waited on hundreds of people during those months. How could she possibly remember one man? I came in late one night. Luca continued, his voice soft with memory. You were the only server left working alone because someone had called in sick. I ordered the seafood risotto and a bottle of Chianti. You were exhausted, running on nothing but determination and caffeine, but you still smiled at every customer like they were the most important person in the world. Images flickered through Nia's mind. Blurry faces, endless plates, the ache in her lower back from standing for 12 hours straight. But nothing specific, no memory of this man who claimed to remember her so clearly. I don't... She began, then stopped. There had been one night toward the end of her time at Marcello's. A late customer who'd left a tip that was more than she'd made in a week. She'd thought it was a mistake, had run after him to return the money, but he'd already disappeared into the night. The tip, she whispered. You left $1,000. Luca smiled, the first genuine expression of joy she'd seen from him. You remember. I thought it was a mistake. I tried to find you to give it back. I know. I watched you from across the street, saw you running after me. You were 7 months pregnant and exhausted, but you still chased after a stranger because you thought he'd made an error that might cost him money he couldn't afford to lose. The memory came flooding back now. The weight of her pregnancy, the panic when she'd seen the amount of the tip, the way she'd stood on the sidewalk in the cold, searching for a man who'd vanished like smoke. She'd kept the money in the end, had used it to pay for Mason's bassinet and car seat, but she'd never forgotten the guilt of accepting something that felt too good to be true. Why? She asked. Why did you do that? Because I could see you needed it. And because... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because I recognized something in you. A strength that refused to break even when everything was falling apart around you. So you've been watching me for 2 years. Not watching, waiting. The distinction sent a chill down her spine. Waiting for what? For the right moment. For you to need me as much as I need you. Nia's breath caught. The intensity in his voice, the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and rare. It was overwhelming and terrifying, and somehow exactly what she'd been missing without knowing it. I don't understand what you need from me, she said quietly. Everything, Luca replied simply. Your trust, your loyalty, your future. And in return, everything I have to give. Protection, security, a life where you never have to worry about money or safety, or whether Mason will have everything he needs to succeed. It sounded like a fairy tale too perfect to be real. Nia looked down at her son sleeping peacefully in her arms, blissfully unaware that his entire future was being negotiated over his head. What exactly are you proposing? Marriage. The word dropped between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everything Nia thought she understood about her situation. Marriage, she repeated numbly. To someone I barely know. You know enough, Luca said. You know I can take care of you and Mason. You know I'm attracted to you, and you're attracted to me. You know I have the resources to give your mother the treatment she needs, and to ensure Mason never wants for anything. Those are practical considerations, not reasons to get married. Practical considerations are the foundation of every successful marriage. Love. He paused and something flickered in his dark eyes. Love can grow from respect and compatibility, but financial security, trust, shared goals, those are what make a partnership last. And if I say no, then I'll still pay for your mother's treatment. I'll still make sure you get home safely. But the offer won't come again. There was no threat in his voice, no pressure beyond the simple statement of fact. But Nia could read between the lines. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance, to give Mason the kind of life she'd never been able to imagine for herself. I need time to think. Of course. But not too much time. Your mother needs to begin treatment soon, and there are arrangements that need to be made. What kind of arrangements? The kind that ensure your safety and Mason's. The kind that make it clear to anyone who might wish you harm that you're under my protection. The casual way he mentioned potential threats sent ice through her veins. Why would anyone want to harm us? Because of who I am. Because of what I represent. Luca's voice grew harder, more serious. I won't lie to you, Nia. My world can be dangerous, but it can also be secure in ways that most people never experience. You would never want for anything, never fear for Mason's future. Your world, she repeated. You keep saying that like it's something specific. What do you do, Luca, really? He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to gauge how much truth she could handle. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. I run a family business, import and export primarily. Some real estate, some investments. We've been in Chicago for 4 generations, building connections, establishing trust. It was an answer that told her nothing and everything at the same time. The careful phrasing, the emphasis on family and generations, the way his men had moved with military precision. It painted a picture that Nia wasn't sure she wanted to see clearly. And this family business requires you to travel with bodyguards and make people disappear into first-class cabins. It requires me to be careful, to protect what's mine. What's mine? The possessive phrase sent heat curling through her belly, even as her rational mind screamed warnings. She was standing in a hospital room holding her infant son, discussing marriage with a man who might be involved in things she couldn't even name. It was insane, But her mother was dying, and Mason needed a future, and Luca was offering her a way out of the desperate poverty that had defined her entire adult life. "I need to see you again," she said suddenly. "Before I decide anything, I need to understand who you really are." "Tomorrow night," Luca said immediately. "I'll send a car to pick you up." "Where?" "My home. I want you to see how we would live." The way he said "we" sent another shiver through her, as if it were already decided, as if she were already his. The presumption should have angered her, but instead it stirred something deeper, something that responded to his quiet confidence with a longing she didn't want to acknowledge. "What about Mason? Bring him. There are people at my house who can help with him while we talk." People, staff, a housekeeper who raised 3 children of her own, a cook who makes the best children's food you've ever tasted. They're trustworthy, discreet, and they understand the importance of family. Every answer he gave raised new questions, but before Nia could ask them, her mother stirred in the bed beside them. Elizabeth's eyes opened slowly, focusing first on Nia, then shifting to Luca with curious interest. "Mom, this is Luca Castellano," Nia said quickly. He's been helping us." "Mr. Castellano." Elizabeth's voice was weak, but her gaze was sharp as she studied him. "I understand I have you to thank for my daughter's upgrade on the flight." "It was nothing," Luca replied, moving closer to the bed. "I'm sorry to meet you under these circumstances, Mrs. Sullivan, but I want you to know that your daughter and grandson will be well cared for." "Will they?" Elizabeth's eyes never left his face. "And what exactly does that care cost?" "Mom," Nia protested, embarrassed by her mother's directness. "It's all right," Luca said. "Your mother is protecting you as she should. The answer, Mrs. Sullivan, is that it costs nothing that your daughter isn't willing to give. And if she's not willing to give anything, then she owes me nothing beyond the pleasure of her company on the flight here." Elizabeth studied him for another long moment, and Nia could practically see her mother's formidable mind working behind her tired eyes. Finally, Elizabeth smiled, a small, knowing expression that Nia remembered from childhood. "You're not what I expected," Elizabeth said. "What did you expect? Someone less substantial?" "Nia has always attracted men who needed her more than they could take care of her. You're different." "I am." The simple confidence in his voice made something flutter in Nia's chest. She watched the interaction between her mother and this enigmatic man who had somehow inserted himself into their lives, noting the way Elizabeth seemed to approve despite her natural suspicion. "Take care of my girl," Elizabeth said finally. "And my grandson. They deserve better than what life has given them so far." "They'll have the best of everything," Luca promised. "You have my word. The word of a man I just met. The word of a man who understands the value of family." Elizabeth nodded slowly, settling back against her pillows. "I'm tired now, but I want to see you again, Mr. Castellano. Before the treatment makes me too sick for good conversation." "I would be honored." Luca turned to Nia, and she saw something in his expression that she couldn't quite name. Satisfaction, perhaps, or relief that he'd passed some test he hadn't known he was taking. "I should go," he said. "Let you rest with your mother. But tomorrow night, Nia, think about what we discussed." "I will." He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. "Mason is lucky to have such strong women fighting for him. He'll grow up knowing his worth because of you." And then he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of expensive cologne and the echo of words that seemed to promise everything Nia had ever wanted and feared to want. "Interesting man," Elizabeth said once they were alone. "That's one word for it. Dangerous too, but not to you, I think. How can you tell? The way he looks at you, like you're something precious he's been searching for his whole life." Elizabeth's voice was growing weaker again, but her eyes remained bright with interest. "The question is, how do you look at him?" Naya glanced toward the door where Luca had disappeared, her heart still racing from their conversation. How did she look at him? With desire, certainly. With curiosity and wariness and a longing that went deeper than simple attraction. "I don't know," she admitted. "Then you'd better figure it out quickly. Men like that don't wait forever, and opportunities like this don't come twice." Nia settled into the chair beside her mother's bed. Mason warm and solid in her arms, and tried to make sense of everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Yesterday, she'd been a broke single mother with no prospects and a dying parent. Today, she was considering marriage to a wealthy stranger who claimed to have been watching her for 2 years. It should have felt like a trap, like desperation making her consider impossible things. But as she watched her mother sleep and felt Mason's steady breathing against her chest, all she could think about was Luca's voice saying, "Everything I have to give," and the way his eyes had gone soft when he looked at her son. Tomorrow night couldn't come soon enough, and that realization scared her more than anything else that had happened since she'd fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder and woken up in a different life entirely. Outside the hospital windows, Chicago stretched endlessly in all directions, full of possibilities and dangers she couldn't yet imagine. Somewhere in that vast city, Luca Castellano was making plans that would change her future forever. The only question now was whether she was brave enough to let him. The next evening arrived with the weight of destiny hanging in the Chicago air. Nia stood before the mirror in the modest hotel room Luca had arranged for her, studying her reflection with critical eyes. The black dress was simple but elegant, delivered that afternoon by a woman who'd introduced herself only as Maria, and who'd somehow known Nia's exact measurements without being told. The fabric was silk expensive enough that Nia was afraid to touch it too roughly, and it fit her like it had been made specifically for her body, which she was beginning to suspect it had been. Mason lay on the bed behind her, gurgling happily at the mobile that had also mysteriously appeared, handcrafted wooden animals that spun gently, casting dancing shadows across the ceiling. Everything in the room spoke of wealth and attention to detail that went far beyond simple hotel amenities. "What do you think, baby?" she asked, turning so Mason could see her. "Do I look like someone who belongs in a mansion?" Mason's response was a stream of delighted babble, and despite her nerves, Nia smiled. At least one of them was adaptable. A soft knock at the door made her heart skip. She opened it to find not Luca, but an older woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She wore a navy blue dress that screamed expensive simplicity, and her smile was warm and genuine. "Miss Sullivan, I'm Rosa Moretti. Mr. Castellano sent me to escort you this evening." Oh, Nia had expected another of Luca's silent bodyguards, not this motherly figure who radiated competence and warmth. I was expecting a car full of intimidating men." Rosa's laugh was rich and knowing. "Mr. Luca thought you might be more comfortable with female company tonight, and someone who understands the challenges of traveling with a baby." As if summoned by the word Mason, let out a demanding cry from the bed. Rosa's entire demeanor shifted, becoming even warmer as she moved past Naya into the room. "And this must be Mason," she said, her voice taking on the universal tone that women used with babies. Soft, musical, utterly captivating. "Oh, aren't you beautiful? Look at those eyes." She lifted Mason with practiced ease, and he immediately calmed in her arms, staring up at her with the kind of fascination he usually reserved for Nia alone. "You're good with babies," Nia observed, gathering Mason's diaper bag and the light jacket she'd brought. "I should be. I raised 4 of my own, plus helped with more children than I can count. Mr. Luca was one of them." The casual revelation made Nia pause in her packing. "You helped raise Luca?" "From the time he was 8 years old." Rosa's voice carried deep affection and something that might have been protective pride. "After his mother died, the Castellano family became my family." "I'm sorry. About his mother. She was a beautiful woman, strong like you. She would have liked you very much." The comparison sent warmth spreading through Nia's chest, followed immediately by a chill of uncertainty. Rosa spoke as if she already knew Nia, as if her place in Luca's life were already established. It was presumptuous and unsettling, and somehow exactly what she needed to hear. "How do you know I'm strong?" Nia asked as they left the hotel room. "Because you're here," Rosa replied simply. "Because you got on a plane with nothing but hope and determination to save your mother. Because you're raising a beautiful child alone, and doing it with grace. And because Luca sees it in you, and that man has excellent judgment when it comes to people." They rode the elevator down in comfortable silence, Mason content in Rosa's arms, while Nia's mind raced with questions she didn't know how to ask. In the lobby, a different car waited, still expensive, still imposing, but somehow less intimidating with Rosa's presence. The drive through Chicago's North Shore took them past increasingly elaborate homes, each one set back from the road, behind gates and perfectly manicured lawns. But nothing prepared Nia for her first glimpse of Luca's house. It wasn't a house. It was an estate. The car turned through iron gates that opened silently at their approach, following a circular drive lined with ancient oak trees. The house itself rose before them, like something from a magazine. 3 stories of limestone and glass, with wings that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. Lights glowed warmly in dozens of windows, and Nia could see the silhouette of formal gardens extending into the darkness beyond. "It's beautiful," she breathed, and immediately felt foolish for the understatement. "Mr. Luca's grandmother designed the gardens," Rosa said, following Nia's gaze. "She said a home should be a sanctuary, a place where family could grow and flourish. He's maintained them exactly as she left them." The car stopped before a massive front door framed by columns that belonged in ancient Rome. Before Nia could fully process the grandeur of it all, the door opened and Luca appeared. He'd changed from his business suit into dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. The casual clothes should have made him seem more approachable, but instead they had the opposite effect, highlighting the predatory grace with which he moved, the coiled power that seemed to radiate from him even in relaxation. "Nia." Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a promise. "You look beautiful." She felt heat rise in her cheeks as his dark eyes traveled over her, taking in every detail of the dress. The way her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, the nervous way she clutched her small purse. His gaze was appreciative but not crude, admiring without making her feel exposed. "Thank you," she managed. "Your house it's incredible. It's your house now if you want it to be." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Rosa cleared her throat gently, reminding them both that they weren't alone. "Perhaps we should go inside," Rosa suggested. "Little Mason is getting hungry, I think." As if on cue, Mason began to fuss, and Luca's attention immediately shifted to the baby. He moved closer, and Nia caught the scent of his cologne, something warm and masculine that made her want to lean into him. "May I?" he asked, extending his arms toward Mason. Rosa transferred the baby without hesitation, and once again, Nia was struck by how natural Luca looked holding her son. Mason settled immediately, his tiny hand grasping Luca's finger with the same fierce grip he used on Nia. "He remembers you," Nia said softly. "Children have good instincts about people." Luca replied, his voice gentle as he spoke to Mason in what sounded like Italian. The baby's eyes were fixed on his face with rapt attention, as if he understood every word. They entered the house through a foyer that could have housed Nia's entire apartment. A chandelier that belonged in a palace cast prismatic light across marble floors and oil paintings that looked like they belonged in museums. But despite the obvious wealth on display, there was something warm about the space. Fresh flowers on a side table, family photographs mixed in with the formal art, the lingering scent of something delicious cooking. "This is incredible," Nia said, turning slowly to take it all in. "How long have you lived here?" "This house has been in my family for 60 years, Luca replied, shifting Mason to his shoulder with practiced ease. "My grandfather bought it when he first came to Chicago. He said America was the land of dreams, and dreams deserved grand stages." "And what was his dream?" Luca's smile was enigmatic. "To build something that would last. Something his children and grandchildren could be proud of." Rosa excused herself to prepare Mason's dinner, leaving Nia alone with Luca in the vast foyer. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with the weight of everything they needed to discuss. "Would you like a tour?" Luca asked. "Or would you prefer to eat? First, Rosa has prepared something special." "A tour," Nia said quickly. She needed to move, needed to understand the scope of what he was offering her. "I want to see everything." He led her through rooms that seemed designed to showcase both wealth and taste. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and leather chairs that invited hours of reading, a music room with a grand piano, and paintings of Italian landscapes, a formal dining room with a table that could seat 20. But it was the smaller, more personal spaces that captivated her. The family room with its comfortable sofas and enormous fireplace photos scattered across the mantelpiece showing Luca at various ages, a serious-faced boy in a school uniform, a teenager in a tuxedo, at what looked like a formal dance, a young man in military dress whites. In every photo, his eyes held the same intensity she recognized from their first meeting. "You were in the military?" she asked, picking up the photo. "Naval Academy. 4 years of service afterward." His voice carried pride mixed with something that might have been regret. "My grandfather believed every man should serve his country before taking over the family business." "But you came back." "Family obligations," he said simply. "My father died while I was deployed. Someone had to take over." The casual way he mentioned such profound loss made Nia's heart ache for him. She set down the photo and followed him deeper into the house, each room revealing new layers of the man who'd appeared in her life like some impossible dream. The kitchen was warm and inviting despite its professional-grade appliances, and Rosa was there with Mason feeding him from a high chair that looked expensive enough to be an antique. The baby was eating enthusiastically, laughing between bites at something Rosa was saying in rapid Italian. "He's a good eater," Rosa reported, "and he likes the sweet potato puree. I made it fresh this afternoon." "You made baby food?" Nia asked, surprised. "Of course. Store-bought food is full of preservatives and artificial flavors. Children should learn to appreciate real food from the beginning." Luca moved to stand behind the high chair, one hand resting protectively on Mason's back. The picture they made, the powerful man, the motherly woman, the happy baby, looked like something from a different life. A better life. "Rosa has been perfecting her baby food recipes," Luca said. She's convinced the next generation of Castellanos will be gourmets from birth. The next generation of Castellanos. The phrase sent heat spiraling through Nia's belly. He spoke as if Mason were already part of his family, as if their future were already decided. "Dinner will be ready in an hour," Rosa announced. "Shall I put little Mason down for a nap? He looks tired." "I can do it," Nia said quickly. She wasn't ready to surrender all control, not yet. "Of course. The nursery is upstairs, first door on the right. Everything you need should be there." The nursery. Nia's heart skipped. "You have a nursery?" "We had it prepared today," Luca said casually, as if having a fully equipped nursery appear overnight were perfectly normal. Rosa supervised the setup. She has very specific ideas about what children need. Nia lifted Mason from the high chair, marveling at how clean Rosa had managed to keep him, despite the messy meal. The baby was drowsy and content, his belly full, and his natural charm having clearly won over another member of Luca's household. The nursery, when she found it, took her breath away. It was like something from a fairy tale. Pale yellow walls with hand-painted murals of farm animals, a crib that looked like it belonged to royalty shelves lined with books and toys that must have cost more than Nia's monthly salary. Everything was perfect, from the plush rocking chair by the window to the changing table stocked with premium diapers and organic lotions. "This is too much," she whispered, settling Mason into the crib. He went down without protest, exhausted by the day's excitement and new experiences. "Is it?" Luca's voice came from the doorway, where he leaned against the frame, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Or is it exactly what every child deserves? Children don't need all this luxury." "No," he agreed, moving into the room. "They need safety and love and the knowledge that they're valued above everything else in the world. But why shouldn't they also have beauty? Why shouldn't they grow up surrounded by things that remind them they're precious?" He stopped beside the crib, looking down at Mason with an expression of such tenderness that Nia's breath caught. There was something almost reverent in the way he watched her son sleep, as if Mason were a miracle he'd been waiting his whole life to witness. "You talk about him like he's already yours," she said softly. "Isn't he?" Luca turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made her pulse quicken. "From the moment I saw you with him on that plane, I knew. This is what I've been waiting for. This is what I want to protect and cherish and fight for every day of my life. You want to fight for a baby you met yesterday? I want to fight for both of you, for the chance to be the man who gives you everything you've never dared to dream of having." The words were like silk and steel wrapping around her heart with gentle strength. Nia looked down at Mason sleeping peacefully in his perfect crib, then back at Luca, who was watching her with the patience of a man who knew exactly what he wanted and was willing to wait for it. "What if I'm not what you think I am?" she asked. "What if I disappoint you?" "Impossible." "You don't know me well enough to say that. I know you worked 3 jobs while you were pregnant to save money for Mason's future. I know you chose his name because James was your father's middle name, and you wanted your son to carry that strength. I know you read to him every night, even when you're so tired you can barely keep your eyes open because you believe children who grow up with stories become adults who believe in possibilities." Each revelation hit her like a physical blow. "How could you possibly know all that?" "Because I made it my business to know. Because from the moment I saw you at Marcello's, I couldn't get you out of my head. Because I've been waiting 2 years for the courage to approach you properly." 2 years, she repeated numbly. "You've been watching me for 2 years. Not watching, protecting. Making sure you were safe, that Mason was healthy, that you had what you needed, even when you didn't know where it came from." Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. The tips that were too big, the bills that got mysteriously paid, the scholarship that appeared out of nowhere for my nursing classes. You were struggling, and you were too proud to ask for help. So I found ways to help without your pride getting in the way. That's not help, Nia said, her voice rising with the shock of realization. That's manipulation. That's control. That's love, Luca corrected quietly. Or the closest thing to it I knew how to give at the time. The word hung between them like a challenge, like a confession, like a promise. Love. He'd said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You don't love me, she protested. You can't. We barely know each other. I know you better than anyone else in your life, he said, stepping closer. I know you take your coffee black because you can't afford cream. I know you sing off-key lullabies that make Mason smile anyway. I know you cry in the shower so he won't see you break down from the stress of trying to do everything alone. Each word was a revelation and an invasion proof of just how thoroughly he'd inserted himself into her life without her knowledge. It should have terrified her, should have sent her running from this beautiful house and this dangerous man who thought surveillance was a form of courtship. Instead, it broke something open inside her chest, some wall she'd built around her heart to keep out disappointment and false hope. That's not love, she whispered. That's obsession. Maybe. But it's the kind of obsession that builds empires and protects families and ensures that the people I care about never want for anything again. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. I want to give you the world, Naya. I want to give Mason everything I never had. Stability, legacy, the knowledge that he's part of something bigger than himself. And what do you want from me in return? Everything, he said simply. Your trust, your loyalty, your willingness to build a life with me. I want you in my bed and at my table and by my side when I make the decisions that affect our family's future. Our family. There it was again, that presumption of belonging that should have infuriated her, but instead sent heat pooling low in her belly. What if I can't love you back? She asked. What if this is all just desperation and gratitude and I wake up in 6 months wondering what I've done? Then we'll figure it out together. But I don't think that's what will happen. How can you be so sure? Because of the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. Because you leaned into me on that plane like you'd been waiting your whole life for someone safe enough to rest against. Because right now, with my hands on your face and my mouth inches from yours, your pupils are dilated and your breathing is shallow, and every instinct you have is telling you to let me kiss you. He was right. God help her, he was absolutely right. Standing in this perfect nursery, with her son sleeping peacefully nearby, she wanted nothing more than to close the distance between them and find out if his mouth was as skilled as his hands, as commanding as his voice. This is crazy, she breathed. The best things usually are. My mother is dying, and she'll have the best care money can buy. She'll see Mason grow up, see him graduate from college, maybe even dance at his wedding. You can't promise that. I can promise to fight for it with everything I have. Can you promise me the same? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Downstairs, Rosa was preparing dinner and humming Italian lullabies. Outside, Chicago glittered with possibility and danger in equal measure. And in this room, in this moment, Naya felt the future reshaping itself around her, like clay in a sculptor's hands. I need more time, she said finally. I need to understand what you're really offering, what you're really asking for. Then let's go have dinner, Luca said. his hands dropping from her face but his eyes never leaving hers. Let's talk about what our life could look like. Let's be honest with each other about what we both want. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing to look back at her with an expression that was pure masculine confidence. And Nia, for what it's worth, I think you're going to surprise yourself with how much you're capable of wanting. The words followed her as she took one last look at Mason sleeping peacefully in his perfect crib, and then followed Luca downstairs to a dining room where candles flickered and wine waited, and the most important conversation of her life was about to begin. The dining room Rosa had prepared was intimate despite its grandeur. Candles casting warm light across mahogany and crystal flowers that perfumed the air with subtle elegance, placed settings that spoke of generations of family dinners and important conversations. Luca held her chair, his fingers brushing her shoulders as she sat, and even that brief contact sent awareness racing along her nerve endings. Rosa outdid herself, he said, settling across from her. She wanted to make a good impression. She already has. She's wonderful with Mason. She's wonderful with everyone. When my father died, she could have gone anywhere, worked for any family in Chicago. But she stayed. Said the Castellanos were her people now, and family doesn't abandon family. There was deep affection in his voice when he spoke of Rosa, and something else. Gratitude, maybe, or the kind of love that came from years of shared history. It made Nia wonder what kind of employer inspired that level of loyalty. What kind of man earned that degree of devotion from someone who had no obligation to give it. Rosa appeared with the first course, something that looked too beautiful to eat and smelled like heaven. She served them with efficient grace, her movements speaking of long practice and genuine pride in her work. The wine is from my family's vineyard in Tuscany, Luca said, as Rosa filled their glasses. My great-grandfather planted the first vines the year he came to America. Said a man should always remember where he came from, even when he was building something new. Your family has a vineyard in Italy. Had. We sold it 5 years ago. Sometimes the past becomes too expensive to maintain. Something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, or the weight of difficult decisions. But I kept a few cases of the last vintage, for special occasions. Is this a special occasion? It's the first time I've brought a woman home for dinner, he said simply. So yes, I'd say it qualifies. The casual admission sent heat spiraling through her. She took a sip of wine to cover her reaction and nearly moaned at the taste. Rich and complex with hints of cherry and something darker, earthier. It was the kind of wine that spoke of sunshine and ancient traditions and care that spanned generations. It's incredible, she said. Like everything else worth having, it took time and patience to develop. His dark eyes held hers over the candlelight. Some things can't be rushed. The implication in his words was clear, and Nia felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the food as spectacular as everything else about the evening. But beneath the civilized veneer of dinner conversation, tension hummed between them like a live wire. Tell me about your family, she said, finally needing to break the spell he was weaving with wine and candlelight and the intensity of his attention. Your grandfather, your father, what were they like? Luca set down his fork, considering the question. My grandfather was a complicated man. Brilliant, ambitious, absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting his family. He came to America with nothing but determination and a willingness to do whatever was necessary to succeed. Whatever was necessary. This was a different time, Nia. Chicago in the 60s wasn't kind to immigrants, especially Italian immigrants. My grandfather did what he had to do to carve out a place for his family in a world that didn't want us. There was pride in his voice, but something else too. A careful neutrality that suggested layers of history she wasn't ready to hear. Nia filed the observation away, adding it to the growing list of things about Luca Castellano that didn't quite add up to a simple businessman. And your father tried to legitimize everything my grandfather had built, turned muscle and territory into corporations and investments. He was softer than his father, more idealistic. He believed you could change the world without getting your hands dirty. What happened to him? Heart attack. He was 45, healthy as a horse, and one day he just collapsed. The doctors said it was stress, but I think it was more than that. I think he died trying to be something he wasn't, trying to live up to an ideal that cost him everything that mattered. The pain in his voice was carefully controlled, but unmistakable. Nia reached across the table without thinking, covering his hand with hers. His skin was warm, his fingers strong as they turned to capture hers. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been devastating." "It was educational," Luca replied, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "It taught me that good intentions don't protect the people you love. Power does. Resources do. The willingness to do whatever is necessary does. And what is necessary, that depends on the situation, on what's at stake." His eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. "Right now, what's necessary is convincing you that I can give you and Mason a life worth having. By offering me money and security, by offering you everything. Partnership, protection, passion." His voice dropped lower, becoming more intimate. "By proving that what we have between us is worth building on." "What do we have between us, really?" "Chemistry," he said immediately. "Attraction, compatibility, the foundation for something that could become extraordinary given time and nurturing. Those are practical considerations again. Practical considerations matter. But you're right. There's more than that." He lifted their joined hands, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles that sent electricity racing up her arm. "There's the way you fit against me when you sleep. The way Mason reaches for me like he knows I belong in his life. The way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. Like you're afraid to want what I'm offering, but can't help yourself." The accuracy of his observation made her cheeks burn. "You're very sure of yourself." "I'm sure of what I see. I'm sure of what I want. The question is whether you're brave enough to want it too." Rosa appeared to clear their plates, replacing them with something that looked like art and smelled like paradise. She moved efficiently, but Nia caught the older woman's pleased smile as she noticed their joined hands across the table. "Rosa approves of me," Nia observed once they were alone again. "Rosa has been waiting 35 years for me to bring a woman home. She's been planning this dinner since I called her yesterday." 35 years? How old are you?" "Old enough to know what I want when I see it. Young enough to fight for it with everything I have." "That's not an answer." "I'm 35. Old enough to have made my mistakes, young enough to spend the next 50 years making up for them with the right woman." "And you think I'm the right woman?" "I know you are." The certainty in his voice was overwhelming. Nia pulled her hand free and reached for her wine, needing something to do with her hands that wouldn't betray how much his words affected her. "What if you're wrong? What if I'm not strong enough for your world? Whatever that really means. What if I can't handle the pressure or the scrutiny or the expectations? Then I'll make sure you never face any of those things alone. That's what partnership means, Nia. That's what family means. You don't have to be strong enough for everything. You just have to be willing to let me be strong enough for both of us when you need it." And when you need it, who's strong for you? The question seemed to surprise him. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the candlelight. No one's ever asked me that before, he said finally. Maybe no one's ever cared enough to ask. Maybe not. His voice was softer now, more vulnerable than she'd heard it before. Would you care enough to ask, care enough to be that person for me? The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Nia looked across the table at this powerful, complicated man who'd turned her life upside down in less than 48 hours and felt something shift inside her chest. Something that felt dangerously like hope. I might, she said quietly, if you gave me reason to. What kind of reason? Honesty. Real honesty, not careful half-truths and elegant evasions. I need to know what I'm walking into, Luca. I need to understand what your world really looks like. He was quiet for a long time, and she could see him weighing something in his mind. Finally, he stood up, extending his hand toward her. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. She followed him through the house to a room she hadn't seen during their earlier tour. His study, clearly with dark wood paneling and leather furniture that spoke of serious business conducted in comfortable surroundings. But it was what covered the walls that made her breath catch. Photographs, dozens of them spanning what looked like decades. Men in expensive suits shaking hands with politicians. Ribbon-cutting ceremonies for hospitals and schools. Charity galas where the Castellano name featured prominently on donation boards. And through it all, the evolution of a family, from his grandfather's stern face in black and white to his father's gentler features in color to Luca himself, growing from a serious boy into the commanding man beside her. This is your family's legacy, she said, moving closer to study the images. Part of it, the public part. He moved to stand behind her, his hands settling lightly on her shoulders. 4 generations of Castellanos building something that matters in this city. Hospitals, schools, community centers. Places where people who have nothing can find help. It's impressive. It's not the whole story. She turned in his arms, studying his face. What's the rest of it? The rest of it is that power comes with a price. That building something that lasts requires making enemies as well as allies. That protecting what matters sometimes means doing things that can't be photographed for charity galas. What kind of things? The kind that ensure my enemies think twice before they threaten what's mine. The kind that keep people like you and Mason safe in a world that can be very dangerous for those who can't protect themselves. The words sent a chill through her, but not entirely from fear. There was something darkly compelling about the idea of being claimed and protected by a man who could back up his promises with real power. Are you telling me you're involved in organized crime? I'm telling you that the line between legitimate business and necessary protection isn't always as clear as people like to pretend. I'm telling you that I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe, and I need you to be able to live with that. Even if what it takes is illegal. Even then. The simple honesty of his answer should have sent her running. Should have made her grab Mason and disappear into the night before she got in any deeper. Instead, it made something fierce and primitive in her chest unfurl with dangerous satisfaction. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked for honesty. Because you deserve to know what you're choosing. Because I won't have you looking at me with horror and disgust 6 months from now, when you figure out that your husband isn't the respectable businessman you thought you married. Husband. The word hit her like a physical blow, sending heat spiraling through her belly and panic racing through her mind in equal measure. Is that a proposal? It's a statement of intent. Luca replied, his hands tightening on her shoulders. Marry me, Nia. Let me give you and Mason everything you've ever wanted, and some things you haven't even dreamed of yet. Let me be the man who makes sure you never have to choose between your pride and your survival again. And if I say no, then I'll take you back to your hotel, pay for your mother's treatment, and disappear from your life. You'll never see me again. You'd do that, just walk away. If that's what you wanted. But it's not what you want, is it? He was right, and they both knew it. Standing in his study, surrounded by 4 generations of Castellano history, she could feel the pull of everything he was offering. Security, partnership, a future for Mason that went beyond anything she could provide alone. But more than that, she could feel the pull of him, the magnetic attraction that had drawn her from the moment she'd first looked into his dark eyes. "This is insane," she whispered. "Probably, but so is everything worth having. I don't know how to be the wife of someone like you." "You don't have to know. You just have to be willing to learn. Together." "What if I disappoint you?" "Impossible," he said again, and this time she almost believed him. "What if you disappoint me? Then I'll spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make up for it." The promise hung between them like a vow, like a challenge, like the beginning of everything she'd been too afraid to hope for. Upstairs, Mason was sleeping peacefully in a nursery that belonged in a fairy tale. In a hospital across the city, her mother was receiving treatment that could save her life. And here in this room full of history and power and dangerous possibilities, a man who could give her the world was asking for nothing more than her willingness to let him try. "I need one more thing," she said finally. "Anything. I need you to kiss me. I need to know if this thing between us is real, or if it's just desperation and gratitude and the need to believe in something impossible." And his smile was slow and devastating, full of masculine satisfaction and something deeper, hungrier. "I thought you'd never ask." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs stroking across her cheekbones, as he lowered his mouth toward hers. The first touch of his lips was gentle, almost reverent, as if he were afraid she might break or disappear. But when she sighed and leaned into him, when her hands fisted in the soft wool of his sweater, the kiss deepened into something that felt like claiming and surrender all at once. He tasted like wine and promises, and something uniquely masculine that made her head spin. His mouth was skilled and patient, taking time to explore, to discover what made her gasp and what made her melt against him. When his tongue traced the seam of her lips, she opened for him immediately, and the low sound of satisfaction he made sent heat pooling between her thighs. This was what she'd been afraid of, what she'd known from the first moment she saw him. This overwhelming attraction that made rational thought impossible, that made her want to surrender everything to a man who could destroy her without even trying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she could see her own desire reflected in his dark eyes. "Was that real enough for you?" he asked, his voice rough with want. "Yes," she whispered, and knew that with that single word, she was sealing her fate. "Then marry me, Nia Sullivan. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving that fairy tales can come true if you're brave enough to believe in them." She looked into his eyes, saw the future he was offering, written there in promises and passion and protection she'd never dared to dream of. Behind all the rational arguments against it, beneath all the fear and uncertainty, she could feel the truth singing in her blood. She wanted this, wanted him. Wanted the life he could give Mason and the partnership he was offering her, and the chance to find out what forever could look like with a man who'd been waiting 2 years for the courage to claim her. "Yes," she said, and felt the world reshape itself around that single impossible word. The word hung in the air between them, like a bridge crossed, like a door opened, like the first note of a song that would define the rest of her life. Luca's eyes went dark with something that might have been relief or triumph, or something deeper than either. And then his mouth was on hers again, harder this time, more demanding. This kiss tasted of possession and promise of a claim being made and accepted. When they broke apart, Nia was breathless, her heart hammering against her ribs with the magnitude of what she'd just agreed to. She'd said yes to a man she'd known for 2 days, yes to a future she couldn't fully imagine, yes to stepping into a world where power and protection came wrapped in designer suits and dangerous smiles. "I can't believe I just did that," she whispered, her hands still fisted in his sweater. "Believe it," Luca said, his voice rough with emotion, "because I'm not letting you take it back. What happens now? Now we make it official. Now we build the life we both want." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small velvet box that made Nia's breath catch. She stared at it, her mind reeling with the impossibility of it all. "You had a ring with you." "I've had this ring for 6 months. He admitted, opening the box to reveal a stone that caught the light and threw it back in brilliant fire. "I knew what I wanted the moment I decided to approach you. I just had to wait for you to want it too." The ring was perfect. A vintage setting that spoke of elegance and history, a diamond that was large enough to make a statement, but not so ostentatious as to be vulgar. It looked like something that had been in a family for generations, passed down from mother to daughter as a symbol of love and commitment. "It was my grandmother's," Luca said, reading her thoughts. "She gave it to my grandfather when they were engaged in Italy. Said it was the only thing of value she owned, but she wanted him to have something beautiful to remember their promise by." "I can't take your grandmother's ring." "You're not taking it. I'm giving it to you. Because you're going to be my wife, and this ring belongs on the hand of the woman who carries the Castellano name." He lifted the ring from its velvet nest, and Nia found herself extending her left hand without conscious thought. The ring slid onto her finger like it had been made for her, fitting perfectly, catching the light with every movement. "It's beautiful," she breathed, staring at her hand as if it belonged to someone else. "Not as beautiful as the woman wearing it." The compliment sent warmth spreading through her chest, but it was followed immediately by a wave of panic. This was real. This was happening. In the space of a single evening, her entire life had changed course. "Luca?" she began, then stopped, not sure how to voice the fears racing through her mind. "What is it, cara mia?" The endearment in Italian sent shivers down her spine. "What if I'm making a mistake? What if I'm just scared and desperate, and I wake up tomorrow wondering what I've done? Then tomorrow I'll spend the day convincing you that you made the right choice. And the day after that, and the day after that, until you believe it in your bones. What if I never believe it? Then I'll love you anyway. I'll protect you anyway. I'll give you and Mason the best life I can anyway." His hands framed her face, thumbs stroking across her cheekbones. "That's what marriage means, Nia. It means choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." The simplicity of his answer, the quiet certainty in his voice, made something settle in her chest. This wasn't about grand gestures or fairy tale romance. It was about partnership, about building something real and lasting together. "When?" she asked. "Soon. This week if possible. I don't want to give you time to change your mind." "A week." Nia's voice rose with something between panic and excitement. "That's not enough time to plan a wedding." "It's enough time to plan our wedding. Small, intimate, just family and close friends. Unless you want something bigger." She thought about the wedding she'd dreamed of as a little girl. White dress church full of flowers, hundreds of guests celebrating her happiness. But that dream had belonged to a different woman, one who'd had the luxury of believing in fairy tales. The woman she was now wanted something simpler, more real. "Small sounds perfect," she said. "But what about your family? Your friends? Won't they expect something more elaborate?" "They'll expect whatever makes you happy. That's all that matters to me." Rosa appeared in the doorway, her timing so perfect that Nia suspected she'd been listening from the hallway. The older woman's face was radiant with joy, and she moved quickly to embrace Nia with the warmth of someone welcoming a daughter home. "Finally," Rosa said, switching between English and rapid Italian that sounded like prayers of thanksgiving. "Finally, he brings home a woman worthy of the name Castellano." "Rosa," Luca warned, but his voice held affection rather than irritation. "Don't Rosa me, young man. I've been waiting 35 years for this moment. Let me enjoy it." She held Nia at arm's length, studying her face with the intensity of someone memorizing details. "You'll be married here, of course. In the garden. It's where all the Castellano brides have been married. All of them. My grandmother, my great-grandmother, my father's sister. It's tradition." Luca's voice held a note of reverence that spoke of deep family history. "But only if that's what you want." Nia thought about getting married in Luca's garden, surrounded by the beauty his grandmother had created, becoming part of a tradition that stretched back generations. The idea should have intimidated her, but instead, it felt like coming home. "I'd love that," she said. Rosa clapped her hands together with delight. "Perfect. I'll call Father Marcus in the morning. He married Luca's parents, you know. Such a romantic man, always crying during the ceremonies." "Priest?" Nia asked, turning to Luca. "You want a religious ceremony?" "I want whatever ceremony makes you feel most married to me," he replied. "If that's religious, we'll have religious. If you prefer civil, we'll do civil. If you want to elope to Vegas and get married by Elvis, we'll do that too." And the image of Luca in his expensive suit standing next to an Elvis impersonator made Nia laugh, despite the seriousness of the moment. "I think your grandmother's garden sounds much better than Vegas." "Good, because Rosa would never forgive me if we got married anywhere else." "I need to see my mother," Nia said suddenly. "I need to tell her what's happening." "Of course, we'll go first thing in the morning." Together. Together. She should hear it from both of us." His expression grew more serious. "And there are things we need to discuss. Practical things that can't wait until after the wedding." "What kind of practical things?" "Security, for one. The moment word gets out that you're marrying me, you become a target. You and Mason both. I need you to understand what that means." The reminder of the dangerous side of his world sent ice through her veins. "What kind of target?" "The kind that requires bodyguards and background checks on anyone who gets close to you. The kind that means no more spontaneous trips to the grocery store or late-night walks in the park. The kind that means teaching Mason from an early age that there are people who might want to hurt him to get to me." The thought of her innocent baby growing up in a world where such precautions were necessary made her stomach clench. Maybe this is a mistake. Maybe I'm being selfish, putting him at risk for my own happiness. "You're not putting him at risk," Luca said firmly. "You're giving him the best protection money can buy. You're ensuring that he grows up in a world where he has every advantage, every opportunity, every safeguard that can be provided. Yes, there are risks, but there are risks in your current life too. The risk of poverty, of not having the resources to protect him from ordinary dangers, of raising him alone without the support network that comes with being part of a family like mine." "A family like yours," she repeated. You make it sound like some kind of organization. In many ways it is. The Castellanos aren't just a family. We're a network of people who look out for each other, who provide support and protection and opportunities for advancement. When you marry me, you don't just get a husband. You get brothers and sisters and cousins and friends who will fight for you and your son as fiercely as they fight for their own children. And what do I give in return? Loyalty, discretion, the understanding that family business stays within the family. His voice grew harder, more serious. And the trust that I will never ask you to do anything that goes against your moral code or puts you in a position you can't live with. What if your moral code and mine don't align? Then we'll find a way to make them align. That's what compromise means in a marriage. Rosa cleared her throat delicately, reminding them both that they weren't alone. Perhaps these heavy conversations can wait until morning. It's late and little Mason will be waking soon for his feeding. As if summoned by her words, the sound of Mason's crying drifted down from the nursery upstairs. Nia started toward the stairs automatically, but Luca caught her hand. Let me, he said. I want to practice being his father. The words sent a shock of emotion through her. In all her imaginings of Mason's future, she'd never really believed he would have a father figure, someone who would take pride in the daily tasks of raising him. Watching Luca head upstairs to comfort her son, she felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of what family could mean. He's a good man, Rosa said quietly, reading the emotion on Nia's face. Complicated, yes. Dangerous when he needs to be. But at his heart, he's a good man who wants to protect the people he loves. How can you be so sure? Because I raised him. I've seen him at his worst moments and his best ones, and I know what drives him. He wants to build something that lasts, something his children and grandchildren can be proud of. He's been waiting his whole adult life for the right woman to help him do that. And you think I'm the right woman? I think you're the only woman who's ever made him want to try. That has to count for something. Luca's voice drifted down from upstairs, speaking to Mason in the gentle, soothing tones he might use with a frightened animal. She couldn't make out the words, but the melody of it was calming, protective. When Mason's cries quieted, she felt something ease in her chest. He'll be a good father, Rosa continued. Better than his own, I think. He understands what children need because he remembers what it felt like to need those things and not always get them. What happened to him as a child? Loss. Too much loss too early. His mother died when he was 8, and his father was so consumed with grief and business that he wasn't really present for years afterward. Luca raised himself in many ways. That's why family is so important to him now. That's why he'll never let anything happen to you or Mason. The picture Rosa painted of a lonely boy growing into a man determined to protect his own family made Nia's heart ache. She thought about Mason sleeping peacefully upstairs and felt a fierce surge of gratitude that her son would never know that kind of abandonment. When Luca returned carrying a content and sleepy Mason, the sight of them together made something flutter in her chest. He held the baby with natural ease, speaking to him in quiet Italian that seemed to fascinate Mason even in his drowsy state. He's hungry, Luca reported. But I thought you might prefer to feed him yourself. Thank you. She took Mason, their hands brushing in the transfer, and felt the now familiar spark of awareness that seemed to ignite whenever they touched. I should probably head back to the hotel soon. Let you get some rest. Stay. The word was spoken quietly, but it carried the weight of a command. Nia looked up from Mason to find Luca watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Stay tonight. There's a guest room next to the nursery, everything you need. I want you here under my roof where I know you're safe. Luca, please. We're engaged now. We're going to be married in a week. Let me start taking care of you the way I should have been doing all along." The request was reasonable, even practical. But something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, made it feel like more than simple concern for her comfort. It felt like a test, like the first step in a dance they would be learning together for the rest of their lives. "All right," she said finally, "but just for tonight." "Just for tonight," he agreed, but his smile suggested he had plans to make tonight stretch into something longer. Rosa clapped her hands together with satisfaction. "Perfect. I'll prepare the blue room. It has the best view of the garden, and it's close enough to the nursery that you'll hear little Mason if he needs you." As Rosa bustled away to prepare the room, Luca moved closer, his hand settling at the small of Nia's back in a gesture that was becoming familiar. The possessive warmth of his touch sent awareness skating along her nerve endings. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked quietly. "About staying tonight, or about marrying you?" "Either. Both." Nia looked down at Mason, who was gazing up at her with the absolute trust that only babies possessed. In the span of 48 hours, his entire future had changed. He would grow up with opportunities. She could never have provided protection. She could never have offered a father who would love him as his own. "No," she said finally. "No second thoughts. Terrified, yes, but not having second thoughts." "Good, because I meant what I said earlier. I'm not letting you take it back. Even if I wanted to, even then, but you won't want to. You're very confident for a man who's never been married before. I'm confident because I know what I want, and I'm willing to fight for it. Are you?" The question caught her off guard. She'd been thinking of this as something happening to her, something she was allowing or accepting. But he was right. Marriage was an active choice, something that required fighting for working toward building together. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "Yes, I'm willing to fight for this. Then we're going to be just fine." Rosa reappeared to announce that the blue room was ready, and Luca walked them upstairs, carrying Mason's diaper bag and the few belongings Nia had brought with her. The guest room was beautiful, decorated in shades of cream and blue that spoke of understated elegance, with French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the garden. "The nursery is right through there," Luca said, indicating a connecting door. "And my room is at the end of the hall if you need anything." "Thank you. For everything. Today, tonight. I don't know how to thank you for all of this." "You don't need to thank me. This is what family does for each other." Family. The word still felt foreign on her tongue, but it was getting easier to believe. Standing in this beautiful room with Mason drowsing in her arms, and Luca watching them both with satisfaction, she could almost imagine what their life together might look like. "I should let you get some rest," Luca said, though he made no move to leave. "Tomorrow is going to be a busy day." "Busy how?" "Telling your mother for starters. Then there are legal documents to prepare, security arrangements to finalize, wedding plans to make. Rosa is going to want to take you shopping for a dress, and my lawyer needs to meet with you about the prenuptial agreement." "Prenuptial agreement?" The words sent a chill through her. I mean, if we're building a life together." "We are. But I have obligations that go beyond just us, Nia. Business interests, family trusts, legal entanglements that have nothing to do with our marriage but could affect it. The prenup protects both of us." "Protects me from what?" "From being held liable for decisions I made before I met you. From being dragged into legal proceedings that could put you or Mason at risk. From anyone who might try to use our marriage as a way to get to my assets or my business interests." And the casual way he mentioned such serious concerns reminded her again of just how different his world was from anything she'd ever known. "What aren't you telling me about your business? Nothing you need to worry about right now. But eventually, you'll need to understand all of it. The legitimate side and the less legitimate side. You'll need to know which questions to ask, and which ones to avoid, which people you can trust, and which ones you should stay away from." That sounds terrifying. It sounds complicated, but I'll teach you. We'll learn together how to navigate this world in a way that keeps our family safe and our conscience clear. Our family. There it was again, that easy assumption of belonging that made her heart skip. She looked down at Mason, who had fallen asleep in her arms, completely oblivious to the momentous changes happening around him. "He's going to grow up thinking this is normal," she said softly. "The houses, the security, the careful conversations about business that can't be discussed in public. He's going to grow up knowing he's loved and protected and valued. Everything else is just details. Important details. Important, yes, but not more important than love. Not more important than family." Luca moved closer, his hand settling on Mason's head with gentle reverence. "I want him to have everything I didn't. Stability, security, parents who love each other as much as they love him. I want him to grow up knowing he belongs somewhere, that he's part of something bigger than himself. And if he doesn't want to be part of the family business when he's older, then he doesn't have to be. I want him to have choices, Nia. Real choices, not the kind of forced decisions that come from desperation or lack of options." The sincerity in his voice, the careful way he held Mason, the reverence with which he spoke about their future, it all combined to make something settle deep in her chest. This man who could command rooms full of dangerous people spoke about her baby with the tenderness of someone who already loved him completely. "I should let you get some sleep," he said again. But this time he actually moved toward the door. "Sleep well, cara mia. Tomorrow we start building our life together." "Luca." She called his name as he reached the door, not sure what she wanted to say, but not ready for him to leave. "Yes. Thank you for wanting us, for making me feel like we're worth fighting for." His smile was soft and genuine, reaching his eyes in a way she'd rarely seen. "You are worth fighting for, both of you. Never doubt that." And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the beautiful room with her sleeping son and the enormous diamond on her finger that caught the light and reminded her that this was real. This was happening. This was her life now. She settled Mason in the portable crib that had somehow appeared while they were having dinner, then moved to the French doors to look out at the garden, where she would be married in less than a week. The moon was full, casting silver light across manicured lawns and flower beds that spoke of generations of careful tending. Somewhere in this beautiful space she would promise to love and honor a man she'd known for 2 days, would take vows that would bind her to a world she was only beginning to understand. The rational part of her mind whispered that this was insane, that she was making decisions based on desperation and attraction and promises that might prove too good to be true. But the larger part of her, the part that had learned to trust her instincts through years of struggle and survival, told her that this was right. That Luca Castellano was exactly what he appeared to be. A powerful man who wanted to protect and cherish her, who would give Mason everything she'd ever dreamed of, and some things she'd never dared to imagine. Her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Her mother was responding well to the first round of treatment. The doctors were optimistic she should rest and not worry about visiting until morning. Another gift from Luca, she realized. Another way he was taking care of things so she didn't have to carry the weight alone. She changed into the silk nightgown that Rosa had somehow procured, perfectly sized, perfectly appropriate for a guest room rather than seduction. and slipped between sheets that felt like clouds. The bed was enormous, comfortable beyond belief, and she should have fallen asleep immediately after the emotional exhaustion of the day. Instead, she lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about Luca at the end of the hall, wondering if he was awake too, if he was thinking about her, if he was having any doubts about the commitment he'd made so easily. Mason stirred in his crib, making the soft sounds that meant he would be awake and hungry soon. She rose to feed him, settling into the rocking chair by the window, with her son in her arms, and the garden spread out below them like a promise of everything beautiful that was coming. "What do you think, baby?" she whispered as Mason nursed contentedly. "Think we can learn to belong here? Think we can be the family he wants us to be?" Mason's only response was to grasp her finger with his tiny fist, holding on with the determination that had gotten them both through the hardest months of her life. If her baby could adapt to this new world with such ease, maybe she could too. Maybe she could learn to be the kind of woman who belonged in houses like this, who could navigate complicated social situations and dangerous family dynamics with grace. Maybe she could learn to be worthy of a man like Luca Castellano. Outside her window, Chicago glittered in the distance like a city of possibilities. Somewhere out there, people were living ordinary lives, facing ordinary problems, making ordinary choices about ordinary futures. But here, in this house that felt like a fortress against the world, she was choosing something extraordinary. She was choosing to trust a man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd been too afraid to voice. She was choosing to believe that fairy tales could come true if you were brave enough to reach for them. She was choosing to bet everything on the possibility that love could grow from attraction and mutual need into something real and lasting and worth the risks that came with it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, new reasons to doubt the wisdom of what she was doing. But tonight, holding her son in a house full of promise and protection, wearing a ring that connected her to generations of strong women who'd made similar choices, she felt something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. She felt hope. Real, tangible, dangerous hope that this time, this choice, this man might be the answer to everything she'd been searching for without knowing she was looking. And for tonight, that was enough. Morning came too soon, and not soon enough sunlight streaming through the French doors to paint the blue room in shades of gold and promise. Naya woke to the sound of Mason babbling happily in his crib, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw the ring on her finger catching the morning light, and everything came rushing back. The proposal, the kiss, the choice that had changed everything. She was engaged to Luca Castellano. In 6 days, she would be his wife. The thought should have terrified her, but instead it sent warmth spreading through her chest like sunrise. She lifted Mason from his crib, marveling at how well he'd slept in this new place, how easily he'd adapted to luxury that she was still learning to accept. A soft knock at the door interrupted her morning routine. "Come in," she called, expecting Rosa with breakfast, or perhaps clean clothes. Instead, Luca appeared already dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, carrying a tray that smelled like heaven and looked like art. He moved with the confident grace she was coming to associate with him. But there was something softer about him this morning, something that suggested the vulnerability he'd shown her the night before hadn't been an aberration. "Good morning, cara mia," he said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "I thought you might be hungry. You brought me breakfast. Rosa made it. I just wanted the excuse to see you first thing this morning, to make sure you hadn't changed your mind overnight." The admission was so honest, so unexpectedly uncertain, that it made something flutter in her chest. This powerful man who commanded rooms full of dangerous people was nervous about her morning after thoughts. No changed minds, she said softly, shifting Mason to her hip. Though I have to admit, everything feels a little surreal in the daylight. Good surreal or bad surreal? Good, I think. Like I'm living someone else's life, but it's a life I want to learn to inhabit. Relief flickered across his features there, and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Then come have breakfast. We have a lot to accomplish today. The tray held enough food for a small army. Perfectly scrambled eggs, thick-cut bacon, fresh fruit arranged like a work of art, croissants that were still warm from the oven. There was also a high chair that hadn't been there the night before, positioned perfectly by the table with Mason-appropriate food already prepared. You think of everything, Nia said, settling Mason in the chair, and marveling at how he immediately reached for the pieces of soft banana Rosa had cut into perfect baby-sized portions. I try to anticipate needs, Luca replied, pouring coffee from a silver pot that probably cost more than her monthly rent had been. It's a skill you develop in my line of work. Speaking of your work, Nia said carefully, accepting the coffee cup and trying not to think about how domestic this felt, how right. When do I get to understand what that really means? Today, if you're ready. After we see your mother, I want to show you something. Something that will help you understand what you're marrying into. Something good, or something that will make me run screaming. Something honest. Whether that's good or bad depends on your perspective. They ate in comfortable silence, Mason, entertaining them both with his enthusiastic approach to breakfast and his apparent fascination with Luca's serious expressions. Every time Luca looked at him, the baby would giggle and clap his hands, and every time Mason laughed, something in Luca's face would soften in a way that made Nia's heart skip. He likes you, she observed. The feeling is mutual. I've never understood people who claim not to like children. How can you not like someone who sees joy in everything, who trusts so completely? Not everyone finds children as charming as you seem to. Then they're missing something essential about life. He reached over to wipe banana from Mason's chin with a gentleness that spoke of genuine affection. Children remind us what's worth protecting, what's worth building for. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, and Nia found herself studying his profile as he interacted with her son. There was something almost reverent in the way he touched Mason, as if the baby were made of spun glass and infinite possibility. You really want this, she said suddenly. Not just me, not just the idea of a family. You want him specifically. You want to be his father. From the moment I saw him on that plane, from the moment he grabbed my finger and wouldn't let go. Luca's voice carried a conviction that made her breath catch. I know it sounds insane, but I looked at him and thought, there's my son. Not your son that I'm willing to accept, but my son that I've been waiting to meet. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. He's never had that. A man who wanted him just for being himself. He has it now. He'll have it for the rest of his life. The promise hung between them, like a vow, like something sacred and unbreakable. Nia blinked back tears and focused on her coffee, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Luca was offering her son. We should go see your mother, he said after a moment. The doctors want to start the next phase of treatment this afternoon. Already? The sooner we begin, the better her chances. And the sooner she's stable, the sooner we can focus on our wedding without worrying about her health. He was right, but the reminder of her mother's condition sent anxiety spiking through her. Elizabeth had looked so frail yesterday, so unlike the formidable woman who'd raised Nia with iron will and impossible standards. The idea that experimental treatment might save her felt too good to be true. What if it doesn't work? She asked quietly. Then we'll have given her the best possible chance and we'll face whatever comes next together. But I have a good feeling about this treatment, cara mia. Your mother is stronger than she looks. How would you know? Because she raised you. Anyone who could raise a woman strong enough to survive what you've survived and still be brave enough to trust me has to be formidable. The compliment was so unexpected, so genuinely admiring, that it made her cheeks warm. You make me sound much braver than I am. You got on a plane with nothing but hope and determination. You said yes to marrying a man you'd known for 2 days because you believed it was right for your son. You're wearing my grandmother's ring and planning to become part of a family you don't fully understand because you're willing to bet everything on the possibility that this could work. He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. If that's not brave, I don't know what is. Before she could respond, Rosa appeared in the doorway with a garment bag draped over her arm and an expression of barely contained excitement. Miss Nia, I took the liberty of having some clothes sent over for today's important conversations. You'll want to look like you belong, yes. The garment bag was expensive, the kind of thing that held designer clothes worth more than Nia's car. She accepted it with the growing realization that this was her life now, that people would anticipate her needs and solve her problems before she even realized she had them. Thank you, Rosa. That was very thoughtful. It's my pleasure. And Mr. Luca, your lawyer called. He'll meet you at the office this afternoon with the documents. Luca nodded, then turned back to Nia. The prenuptial agreement. It's standard procedure, nothing personal. I understand. Though she didn't really. The idea of legal documents protecting assets she couldn't even comprehend felt surreal, like playing dress-up in someone else's life. Rosa will help you get ready while I take care of some morning business. We'll leave for the hospital in an hour. He rose from the table but paused to kiss the top of Mason's head, and then after a moment's hesitation pressed a soft kiss to Nia's temple. The casual intimacy of it sent warmth spiraling through her, a reminder that this wasn't just a business arrangement or a marriage of convenience. There was real attraction here, real affection growing between them. After he left, Rosa helped her dress in clothes that fit perfectly and probably cost more than Nia had ever spent on her entire wardrobe. The dress was navy blue, elegant, but not ostentatious, with lines that flattered her figure and suggested sophistication without trying too hard. The shoes were comfortable despite their obvious quality, and the coat was so perfectly tailored that it made her look like someone who belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. You look beautiful, Rosa said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Like you were born to wear clothes like these. I don't feel like I was born for any of this. None of us were born for the lives we end up living, Kara. We grow into them. We learn to fit them like well-tailored clothes. Rosa's eyes were kind but knowing. Mr. Luca wasn't born to be the head of this family either. But he learned. He adapted. He became the man his family needed him to be. What if I can't? What if I'm too ordinary for this world? Ordinary. Rosa laughed, the sound rich and amused. Cara mia, there is nothing ordinary about a woman who can capture the heart of a man like Luca Castellano. Nothing ordinary about someone who can make him want to be a better man than he ever thought possible. Is that what I'm doing? You're doing exactly what he needs you to do. You're making him remember why family matters, why building something good is worth the risks that come with power. Rosa's expression grew more serious. He's been alone for a long time, that boy. Responsible for too much, trusted by too many people who need him to be strong. You make him want to come home at night instead of working until dawn. You make him think about the future instead of just surviving the present. The picture Rosa painted made Nia's heart ache for the man who'd seemed so confident and controlled. He told me some of his history, about losing his parents, about taking over the family business young. He told you some of it, but not all of it. Not the worst parts. Rosa's voice grew soft with memory and old pain. Maybe someday he'll trust you with those stories too. But for now, it's enough that you make him smile. It's enough that he looks at little Mason like he's been waiting his whole life to be a father. Before Nia could ask what Rosa meant about the worst parts, Luca appeared in the doorway. He'd changed into a different suit, charcoal gray instead of black, with a tie that brought out the gold flecks in his dark eyes. He looked like power and success, and barely controlled danger, and the way his gaze heated when he saw her made her pulse quicken. "Perfect," he said, his voice carrying satisfaction and something hungrier. "You look like you belong anywhere I might take you. Even to meet my dying mother. Especially to meet your dying mother. She needs to see that you're going to be taken care of, that her grandson is going to have every advantage. Appearances matter in situations like this." He was right, though the calculating nature of it made her slightly uncomfortable. But this was his world, and she was learning that in his world everything was strategic, everything sent a message. The ride to the hospital was different from their previous trips together. This time, Nia sat beside Luca in the back of the SUV, like she belonged there, wearing clothes that marked her as someone important, carrying herself with the growing confidence that came from being claimed by a powerful man. The bodyguards in the front seat treated her with a deference that suggested they'd received very specific instructions about her status in Luca's life. "When we get there," Luca said as they neared the hospital, "let me talk to the doctors first. Medical professionals respond better to direct authority, especially when large sums of money are involved. I don't want my mother to feel like she's a charity case. She won't. She'll feel like she's a beloved family member receiving the best possible care. There's a difference." At the hospital, their arrival created a subtle stir that Nia was learning to recognize. Doors opened before they reached them, staff members appeared to escort them directly to Elizabeth's room, and the normal bureaucratic delays that plagued most hospital visits simply evaporated in the face of Luca's presence. Her mother was awake and looked better than she had the night before. More color in her cheeks, more alertness in her eyes. The sight of her sitting up in bed actually eating breakfast made tears of relief spring to Nia's eyes. "Mom, you look so much better." "I feel better. Whatever magic this young man worked with the doctors, it's already making a difference." Elizabeth's sharp gaze moved between Nia and Luca, taking in the expensive clothes, the protective way he stood beside her daughter, the obvious wealth and power he carried like a second skin. "Though I suspect there's more to discuss than just my medical treatment." "There is," Nia said, moving to sit beside the bed, while Luca remained standing, a silent pillar of support at her back. "Mom, Luca asked me to marry him, and I said yes." Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, studying Luca with the intensity that had made corporate executives squirm when she'd been healthy. Finally, she smiled, a small, knowing expression that reminded Nia painfully of the formidable woman her mother had always been. "Well," Elizabeth said, "it's about time someone swept my daughter off her feet properly." "Mom, what you think I didn't notice the way he looked at you yesterday? The way you looked at him when you thought no one was watching?" Elizabeth's laugh was stronger than it had been in months. "I may be dying, sweetheart, but I'm not blind." Luca stepped forward, his demeanor shifting into something more formal, more respectful. "Mrs. Sullivan, I want you to know that I understand the gravity of what I'm asking. Your daughter and grandson mean everything to me, and I swear to you that they'll be protected and cherished for the rest of their lives. Sit down, young man. If you're going to be my son-in-law, we need to have a proper conversation." Luca sat in the chair opposite Nia, and she was struck by how different he looked when addressing her mother. Still confident, but with a deference that spoke of deep respect for family hierarchies. "What are your intentions toward my daughter?" Elizabeth asked, and despite the old-fashioned phrasing, her tone was perfectly serious. "To marry her as soon as possible. To give her and Mason everything they need to be happy and secure. To build a family that will last for generations. And what do you expect from her in return? Loyalty, partnership, the willingness to build something together that's stronger than what either of us could create alone." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "And your business interests? How will those affect my daughter's life?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Nia held her breath, wondering how Luca would handle her mother's obvious suspicions about the source of his wealth and power. "My business interests are diverse and sometimes complicated," he said carefully. "But I can promise you that Nia will never be asked to participate in anything that goes against her moral code, and she'll never be put in danger because of decisions I've made." "That's not quite what I asked." "No, it's not. But it's all I can tell you without compromising both our safety and yours." Elizabeth studied him for another long moment, then nodded with what looked like approval. "An honest answer, even if it's not a complete one. I can respect that." "Mom," Nia interjected, "are you really okay with this? Me marrying someone I've known for 3 days? Sweetheart, I knew your father for 6 months before he proposed, and everyone said we were rushing things. But sometimes you just know. Sometimes the heart recognizes what it needs before the mind catches up." Elizabeth reached for Nia's hand, her grip still strong despite her illness. "The question isn't how long you've known him. The question is whether you trust him with your future and Mason's future." "I do," Nia said, surprising herself with how immediately and certainly the words came. "I trust him completely." "Then that's all that matters. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste time second-guessing good fortune when it arrives." Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, chart in hand, and expression cautiously optimistic. "Mrs. Sullivan, I have some good news about your test results from this morning." The next hour was filled with medical terminology and treatment schedules that made Nia's head spin, but the overall message was clear. Her mother was responding better than anyone had dared hope to the experimental therapy. The tumors were already showing signs of shrinkage. Her blood work was improving, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about her long-term prognosis. "Of course," Dr. Martinez cautioned, "we're still in very early stages, but these initial results are extremely encouraging." When they were alone again, Elizabeth was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mom, I'm going to see him grow up," Elizabeth said softly. "I'm going to see Mason take his first steps, say his first words. I might even live to see him graduate from high school." The magnitude of that possibility hit Nia like a physical blow. She'd been preparing herself for losing her mother, for raising Mason, without his grandmother's guidance and love. The idea that he might actually have years with Elizabeth, that she might not have to face motherhood entirely alone, was almost too wonderful to believe. "We're going to get married here," she said suddenly. "In Luca's garden, next weekend. Will you be strong enough to come? Will the doctors let you?" "They'll let me," Elizabeth said firmly. "Even if I have to check myself out against medical advice. I'm not missing my only daughter's wedding." "Mrs. Sullivan," Luca said gently, "if the doctors clear you for the ceremony, I'll arrange for a medical team to be present. Discreet, professional, just as a precaution. And transportation that will be comfortable and safe. You'd do that. You're going to be family. Family takes care of family." Elizabeth smiled, and for the first time since her diagnosis, Nia saw real hope in her mother's eyes. "I like this one," she said to Naya. "He understands what matters." They stayed another hour making plans and sharing stories and letting Elizabeth get to know the man who would be taking care of her daughter and grandson. By the time they left, Nia felt like something fundamental had shifted in her relationship with her mother. The old tensions and disappointments replaced by a shared focus on the future, on the family they were all building together. "She's remarkable," Luca said, as they settled back into the SUV. "I can see where you get your strength. She likes you. That's unexpected. Mom doesn't usually warm up to people so quickly. She recognizes that I can give you things she can't. Security, resources, protection. That matters to a mother who's worried about leaving her child alone in the world." "Is that what you think this is about? Just practical considerations?" "I think it's about love. She loves you enough to want the best possible life for you, even if it means trusting you to a man she doesn't fully understand." The insight was so accurate, so compassionate, that it made Nia's heart ache. "Where to now?" "Now I show you the other side of what you're marrying into. The part that will help you understand why security and discretion matter so much in our world." They drove through Chicago's downtown core past gleaming office buildings and expensive restaurants until they pulled up in front of a nondescript building that looked like any other corporate headquarters. But the security in the lobby was more extensive than Nia had seen anywhere outside of airports, and the deference with which the staff treated Luca suggested this was more than just another business office. "Castellano Enterprises," Luca explained as they rode the elevator to the top floor. "The legitimate face of everything my family has built over the past 60 years. The executive floor was impressive. All marble and mahogany with artwork that belonged in museums and views of the city that spoke of serious money and power. Luca's office was at the end of a long corridor, behind doors that opened onto a space that was part corporate command center, part gentleman's study. But it was the wall of photographs that caught Nia's attention. Images spanning decades showing the evolution of the Castellano family's influence in Chicago. Groundbreaking ceremonies for hospitals and schools, charity galas, where seven-figure checks were presented with casual generosity. Political events where handshakes with mayors and governors suggested access to the highest levels of power. "This is impressive," she said, studying a photo of Luca's grandfather, shaking hands with what looked like a very young Mayor Daley. "It's the public record of what we've accomplished. But it's not the whole story." He moved to his desk and activated what looked like a sophisticated security system, speaking into an intercom in rapid Italian. Within minutes, 3 men appeared. Older than the bodyguards she'd met with, the kind of weathered faces that spoke of hard lives and harder choices. "Nia," Luca said, "I'd like you to meet my senior advisors. These men have been with my family for decades. They helped my father build the legitimate side of our business, and they've helped me maintain it." The introductions were formal, respectful, and Nia found herself being studied with the intensity of men who were evaluating a potential security risk. But there was also something protective in their assessment, as if they were already thinking about how to keep her safe. "Gentlemen," Luca said once the pleasantries were concluded, "I want Miss Sullivan to understand the full scope of what she's becoming part of, the challenges as well as the opportunities." And what followed was the most enlightening and terrifying hour of Nia's life. She learned about the delicate balance between legitimate business interests and less legal enterprises that provided the muscle to protect those interests. She heard about competitors who used violence instead of market forces, about political corruption that required careful navigation, about the constant need to project strength while maintaining plausible deniability. "We're not criminals," one of the older men explained carefully. "We're businessmen who operate in an environment where traditional legal protections aren't always sufficient. Which means, it means sometimes we have to handle problems ourselves. Sometimes we have to send messages that discourage people from thinking our family is an easy target. Sometimes we have to make difficult choices about loyalty and protection that go beyond what the law can provide. Luca watched her face carefully as the reality of his world was laid out in stark terms. This is what I meant when I said my world can be dangerous. Not because we seek out violence, but because we sometimes have to be prepared for it. And me, Mason. How does this affect us? It means you'll have protection wherever you go. It means certain precautions will become part of your daily routine. It means understanding that there are people who might try to hurt you to get to me, and we can't let that happen. The weight of it all pressed down on her like a physical thing. She thought about Mason sleeping peacefully in his perfect nursery, unaware that his new life would require bodyguards and security systems and constant vigilance. I know it's a lot, Luca said quietly. I know it's not the life you imagined for yourself or for Mason. But I can promise you that the protection is real, the security is comprehensive, and the benefits far outweigh the risks. What benefits? One of the advisors opened a portfolio and spread documents across the conference table. Financial statements, investment portfolios, trust fund specifications. Numbers so large that Naya had trouble processing them. This is what Mason will inherit, Luca explained. Not just money, but legitimate businesses that will provide income for generations. Scholarships to any university in the world. Connections that will open doors to any career he chooses, a foundation that will allow him to make a real difference in the world, if that's what he wants. And if something happens to you, then these trusts ensure that you and Mason are taken care of for the rest of your lives. You'll have enough money to live independently if you choose, or you'll have the resources to maintain your place in the family if you prefer. It was all so carefully planned, so thoroughly considered, that it made her head spin. Every contingency had been anticipated, every possible future secured against disaster. There's one more thing, Luca said, producing a different set of documents. The prenuptial agreement my lawyer prepared. I want you to read it carefully, have your own lawyer review it if you prefer, but I think you'll find it's more generous than protective. Nia scanned the documents, trying to make sense of legal language that seemed designed to obscure rather than clarify. But the basic terms were clear enough. In the event of divorce, she would receive a substantial settlement regardless of fault or duration of marriage. Mason would be provided for completely with trust funds and educational provisions that ensured his future regardless of what happened between his parents. This is generous, she said finally. It's insurance for both of us. I want you to feel secure in this marriage, not trapped by it. I want you to choose to stay with me because you want to, not because you have to. And if I choose to leave, then you leave with enough resources to build whatever life you want, wherever you want to build it. But I don't think that's going to happen. Why not? Because we're going to be too busy being happy together to think about leaving. The confidence in his voice, the certainty with which he spoke about their future made something flutter in her chest. He wasn't just offering her security or protection or even partnership. He was offering her the kind of love that built empires and protected families and lasted for generations. I need some time to process all of this, she said finally. Of course, but not too much time. We have a wedding to plan, and Rosa will be extremely disappointed if we have to postpone because you're having second thoughts. No second thoughts, Nia said, surprising herself with how quickly the words came. Just adjustment. This is a lot to take in. I know, but we'll face it together. That's what marriage means. facing whatever comes as a team with all our resources combined and all our strengths supporting each other. As they prepared to leave, one of the older advisors approached Naya with a small wrapped package. "A wedding gift," he explained. "From all of us to the woman who's made our boss smile more in 3 days than he has in 3 years." Inside was a delicate gold bracelet, clearly antique with small charms that told the story of the Castellano family. A tiny ship for the journey from Italy, a small house for the home they'd built in America, a cross for the faith that had sustained them, and a heart for the love that had bound them together through everything. "It belonged to Mr. Luca's great-grandmother," the man explained. "She said it should go to the woman who finally convinced him to start a family of his own." The gesture was so unexpected, so genuinely welcoming, that tears sprang to Nia's eyes. These hard men who navigated dangerous waters and made difficult choices had accepted her immediately, completely, as if she'd always been part of their extended family. "Thank you," she managed. "All of you, for making me feel so welcome." "You make him happy," one of them said simply. "That makes you family." The drive back to Luca's house was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Nia stared out at the Chicago skyline, trying to reconcile the ordinary city she saw with the hidden world of power and protection that Luca had revealed. Everything looked the same, but she felt fundamentally changed by what she'd learned. "Regrets?" Luca asked as they turned into his driveway. "No," she said, and meant it. "Overwhelming gratitude, maybe. A little fear about whether I can live up to what you're offering. But no regrets." "Good, because we have one more stop to make before dinner." "Where?" "To see your wedding dress. Rosa has been working with a designer all day, and she's convinced she's found something perfect." The dress was perfect. More than perfect. It was like something from a fairy tale designed specifically for a woman who was about to marry a prince and become part of a dynasty. The designer had somehow captured elegance and romance and strength, all in one garment, creating something that would photograph beautifully, but also move naturally, that spoke of tradition while feeling thoroughly modern. "How did you know my size?" Nia asked as she stood before the mirror in Rosa's makeshift fitting room. "I have excellent observational skills," Luca replied from the other side of the door. "And Rosa has 40 years of experience estimating women's measurements. You can't see me in this before the wedding. I'm not looking. I'm just enjoying the sound of your voice when you're happy." And she was happy, Nia realized. Standing in a wedding dress that cost more than she used to make in 6 months, preparing to marry a man who could give her everything she'd ever dreamed of, and some things she'd never dared to imagine. She felt something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The week that followed passed in a blur of preparations and revelations each day, bringing new understanding of what her life would look like as Luca's wife. She met his extended family, aunts and uncles and cousins who welcomed her with warmth that felt genuine, who shared stories about Luca as a boy and expressed genuine excitement about meeting Mason. She learned about family traditions and expectations, about the delicate social dynamics that governed relationships between families like the Castellanos and the legitimate world they moved through. Most importantly, she watched Luca with Mason, saw how naturally he'd assumed the role of father, how completely her son had accepted this new man in their lives. Mason reached for Luca now, when he was fussy, babbled happily during their Italian conversations, even slept better when Luca was nearby. Whatever mysterious bond had formed between them on that airplane seemed to grow stronger every day. "He's going to be completely spoiled," Nia observed one evening, as she watched Luca read Mason a bedtime story in what sounded like Italian poetry. All children should be spoiled by their fathers. Luca replied without looking up from the book. That's what fathers are for. And what are mothers for? Mothers teach them to be strong. Fathers teach them to be loved. The simple philosophy, delivered with such quiet conviction, made something settle deep in her chest. This was what she'd wanted for Mason, without even knowing how to articulate it. A father who would love him unconditionally, who would teach him his own worth, who would be there for every milestone and mundane moment that made up a childhood. Her mother had been released from the hospital 2 days before the wedding, and seeing Elizabeth mobile and engaged and optimistic about the future had been almost as emotional as the proposal itself. The experimental treatment was working better than anyone had dared hope, and while the doctors were still cautious about long-term prognosis, the immediate future looked bright enough to include wedding planning and grandmother duties. "I can't believe I'm going to dance at my daughter's wedding," Elizabeth said the night before the ceremony, as Rosa fussed over last-minute alterations to her mother-of-the-bride dress. "3 weeks ago, I thought I'd be lucky to live to see Mason's first birthday." "You're going to live to see much more than that," Nia said firmly. "You're going to spoil him rotten and teach him about his Sullivan heritage and make sure he knows where he comes from. The Castellanos have quite a heritage of their own to share with him. He'll have the best of both worlds, Sullivan's stubbornness and Castellano. What would you call it? Determination," Elizabeth said diplomatically. "Very intense determination." They laughed together, mother and daughter, preparing for a future that had seemed impossible just weeks before. Tomorrow Nia would walk down an aisle lined with flowers from Luca's grandmother's garden, would promise to love and honor a man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd been too afraid to voice. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, with the kind of September weather that made Chicago feel like the most beautiful city in the world. Nia woke in the blue guest room for the last time. Tonight she would sleep in Luca's room, in their room as his wife. The thought sent nerves and anticipation racing through her in equal measure. Rosa arrived with breakfast and barely contained excitement, followed by a small army of stylists and photographers who would document every moment of the day. The house had been transformed overnight into something from a magazine. Flowers everywhere, tables set with crystal and silver that spoke of generations of family celebrations, a string quartet warming up in the garden where the ceremony would take place. "How many people are coming?" Nia asked as she watched servers arranging what looked like enough food for hundreds of guests. "Family," Rosa said vaguely. "Close friends. People who matter to the Castellanos," which turned out to be more people than Nia had expected, though still intimate enough that she could see individual faces in the crowd as she prepared to walk down the aisle. Luca's extended family had gathered from across the country, and there were faces she recognized from the photographs in his office. People of obvious importance and influence who had taken time from their busy lives to witness this union. But it was Luca's face that held her attention as she moved through the garden toward the altar that had been set up beneath an ancient oak tree. He was wearing a black tuxedo that emphasized his dark good looks, and the expression on his face as he watched her approach was everything she could have hoped for. Desire, yes, but also tenderness, and something that looked very much like love. Mason was in the front row with Elizabeth, who looked more beautiful and healthy than she had in months. Her mother was crying, happy tears that spoke of dreams fulfilled and prayers answered. Beside her, Mason was reaching toward Luca with the demanding insistence of a baby who knew exactly where he belonged. The ceremony itself was a blur of beautiful words and sacred promises, conducted by Father Marcus, who did indeed cry during the emotional moments. Nia heard herself promising to love and honor and cherish, felt Luca's hands steady and sure as he slipped his grandfather's wedding band onto her finger to join his grandmother's engagement ring. "You may kiss your bride," Father Marcus announced, and then Luca's mouth was on hers, claiming her in front of God and family and everyone who mattered in their world. The kiss tasted of forever, and promises kept of a future that stretched out before them full of possibility and hope. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the garden erupted in applause and celebration and joy that felt like benediction. "Mrs. Castellano," Luca whispered against her ear, and the name sent shivers of pure happiness through her. "Mr. Castellano," she replied, and felt like she was finally completely home. The reception was everything Rosa had promised and more. Food that was art, wine that was poetry, dancing that went on until the stars appeared overhead. Nia found herself swept into conversations with people whose names she recognized from newspapers, who spoke casually about influence and power, while treating her with the respect due to Luca's wife. But the moment that mattered most came late in the evening, when the crowd had thinned and the music had grown softer. Luca appeared at her side with Mason in his arms, both of them looking rumpled and content and perfect. "Dance with us," he said, and she followed him onto the garden dance floor, where other couples swayed to music that spoke of romance and forever. They moved together slowly, carefully, Mason secure between them as the lights twinkled overhead and the scent of roses perfumed the air. This was her family now. This powerful, complicated, loving man who'd claimed her heart, and the baby who would grow up knowing he was wanted and protected and cherished. "Happy?" Luca asked, his voice low and intimate despite the people around them. "Completely," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. No regrets about falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder. No regrets about anything. "This feels like the life I was always meant to have. I just didn't know how to find it." "You didn't find it," Luca corrected gently. "You trusted it when it found you." As the song ended and they prepared to begin their new life together, Nia looked around at the garden full of people celebrating their happiness, at her mother dancing with one of Luca's uncles, at the future spreading out before them like an unwritten book full of blank pages waiting to be filled. She had said yes to an impossible offer from a dangerous man, had trusted her heart more than her head, had chosen to believe in fairy tales, when everything in her experience suggested they didn't exist. And somehow, miraculously, she had been right. Love had found her on an airplane in the small hours of the night, had claimed her with gentle strength and unwavering determination, had given her everything she'd never dared to dream of, and some things she'd never even imagined wanting. As Luca carried Mason toward the house and she followed in her perfect dress, with his grandmother's ring catching the moonlight, Nia felt like the luckiest woman in the world. She had found her place, her purpose, her person. She had found her family. And this was only the beginning.